Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Scene, a quiet place where curiosity slows down, edges soften, and science is allowed to speak without raising its voice. Wherever you are right now, whether the lights are low or the room is already dark, you found your way to a story that begins far below the surface of the world we think we know. Tonight we're drifting downward, past familiar waves and friendly blue water, into a realm that most humans never see with their own eyes, a place where life survives under conditions that seem almost deliberately hostile. This is a place so far removed from daylight and comfort that the creatures living there often look, to us at least, like something pulled straight from a nightmare. The ocean, after all, does a very good job of hiding its secrets. From above it looks calm, reflective, sometimes even inviting. A smooth skin stretched across the planet, broken only by white caps or the slow roll of distant swells. It's easy to forget that this surface is only a thin boundary, that beneath it lies a depth so vast and unfamiliar that calling it alien wouldn't be much of an exaggeration. The deeper you go, the stranger everything becomes, not because nature decided to be cruel or theatrical, but because survival demands very different solutions when light disappears. Pressure increases and food becomes rare. Before we go any farther, take a moment to notice where you are. Are you listening from a city with distant traffic humming through walls, or somewhere quieter, where the night has more room to stretch out? What time is it for you right now? Is this the end of your day or the beginning of a long night? It's a small detail, but fitting, considering that much of what we're about to explore exists in a permanent state of night, far removed from clocks, schedules, and the comforting rhythm of sunrise and sunset. If you find this kind of slow exploration calming, or if learning about strange corners of the natural world helps your mind settle, you might consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. That helps this space reach others who could use a gentle pause too. There's no rush though. Nothing down here moves quickly unless it absolutely has to. When people first see images of deep-sea creatures, the reaction is often immediate and visceral. Words like creepy, terrifying, or unnatural get thrown around without much hesitation. Wide mouths filled with long teeth, eyes that seem too large or too small, bodies that look stretched, translucent, or unfinished. It's tempting to assume that these animals are somehow wrong, as if they've drifted away from the normal rules of life. But the truth is quieter, and in many ways more interesting. These creatures are not mistakes, they are specialists. Every odd angle, every exaggerated feature, every unsettling proportion exist for a reason. The idea of a nightmare is a very human one. It's shaped by our expectations, our fears, and our long history of living in a world lit by the sun. For most of our evolution, danger was something you could usually see coming. Sharp teeth, fast movement, loud sounds. The deep ocean strips all of that context away. There is no light to give warning, no solid ground to stand on, no predictable landmarks. In that environment, familiar shapes stop being useful. Subtlety gives way to efficiency. Anything unnecessary eventually disappears. It's worth remembering that humans evolved in a narrow slice of the planet's available conditions. Moderate pressure, plenty of oxygen, a regular day-night cycle. Our eyes, our skin, our sense of balance, even our sense of beauty are tuned to that environment. When we encounter life that evolved under entirely different constraints, our instincts don't know how to interpret it. What we label as monstrous is often just unfamiliarity wearing the mask of fear. As we move deeper into this topic, we'll take our time. There's no need to rush through the darkness. We'll talk about what happens to light as you descend through the ocean, and how its absence reshapes the rules of biology. We'll look at why some creatures develop enormous mouths, while others barely resemble animals at all by surface standards. We'll explore how pressure changes not just bodies, but behaviour, metabolism, and even the pace of life itself. Along the way, we'll also touch on something closer to home, why the human mind is so quick to turn difference into dread. For now, imagine standing at the edge of the sea at night. The surface is black, broken only by reflections from distant stars or shoreline lights. You know intellectually that the water is full of life, but your senses can't confirm it. The waves don't give anything away. This is where our journey begins, at the boundary between the known and the unseen, where the ocean quietly reminds us that most of Earth operates on terms that have nothing to do with us. The deeper ocean covers more than half of the planet's surface, yet we've explored less of it than the surface of the moon. That alone should tell us something about how difficult it is to access and how little incentive there has been, historically, to look closely. For most of human history, the deep sea was a void, a place ships avoided and stories warned about. Even now, with advanced submersibles and remote vehicles, each descent feels less like a routine expedition and more like a careful negotiation with an environment that does not forgive mistakes. Pressure is one of the first realities that separates the deep ocean from the world above. For every 10 meters you descend, pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere. By the time you reach the deeper zones where many of these so-called nightmare creatures live, the weight pressing in from all sides would instantly crush an unprotected human body. Bones would fail, lungs would collapse, blood chemistry would change in ways that simply aren't compatible with life as we know it. And yet, life thrives there, not in spite of this pressure, but because it has adapted to it over millions of years. This is where the visual strangeness begins to make sense. Skeletons become lighter or disappear entirely. Bodies turn soft and flexible, able to withstand compression rather than resist it. Muscles slow down. Movements become deliberate. Energy is conserved wherever possible. In a place where food might drift by only occasionally, wasting effort is a luxury no organism can afford. Darkness, of course, is the other defining feature. Sunlight doesn't penetrate very far into the ocean. Within a few hundred meters, the bright blues fade into dim twilight. Go deeper still, and even that disappears. Beyond a certain point, the only light that exists is the light produced by living things themselves. In that world, vision changes. Eyes grow larger to capture every possible photon, or they shrink away entirely when sight becomes less useful than other senses. To a surface dweller, these adaptations can look extreme. A fish with a mouth large enough to swallow prey nearly its own size seems excessive, until you realise it might not eat again for weeks or months. Teeth that curve inward like needles aren't there to look threatening. They're there to make sure that once food is captured, it doesn't escape. Translucent skin isn't meant to unsettle observers, it's simply a side effect of losing pigments that serve no purpose in the dark. There's a tendency to project intention onto these forms, as if nature was trying to scare us. In reality, the deep ocean is indifferent. It doesn't reward beauty or punish ugliness. It only filters for what works. Over time, that filtering produces shapes that feel alien to us, not because they're inherently frightening, but because they weren't shaped with our eyes in mind. As you listen, you might notice your own reaction shifting. The initial discomfort that comes from imagining these creatures may soften into curiosity or even respect. That's often what happens when fear is given context, when something stops being a vague threat and starts becoming a system you can understand. It loses much of its power to unsettle. This slow transition mirrors the descent itself. You don't drop instantly into the deepest parts of the ocean. You pass through layers, each with its own rules and residents. The familiar gives way to the unfamiliar gradually, and by the time you reach the deepest zones, your expectations have already been reshaped. That's the pace we'll keep here. Nothing abrupt, no sharp turns, just a steady movement downward, idea by idea, adaptation by adaptation. There's no final reveal waiting at the bottom, no single creature that explains everything. Instead, there's a pattern, one that repeats itself in different forms. Scarcity leads to efficiency, darkness leads to specialization, pressure leads to flexibility. And when those forces act over millions of years, the results can look to human eyes like something out of a bad dream. But dreams, as it turns out, often tell us more about ourselves than about the things we're dreaming of. The deep ocean reflects our discomfort with environments we can't control and bodies that don't resemble our own. It reminds us that we are not the default shape of life, just one variation among many, adapted to a very specific set of conditions. As we continue, we'll move further away from the surface assumptions that shape our first impressions. We'll talk about why the absence of light changes not just how animals look, but how they hunt, communicate, and even reproduce. We'll see how time itself feels different in the deep, stretched out and unhurried, with lifespans and growth rates that don't align with the faster rhythms of the surface world. For now, let the image of the surface fade. Imagine the water growing colder, darker, heavier. Imagine the sounds thinning out until there's nothing but the quiet hum of existence continuing in its own way, far below any shoreline. This is where the creatures we call nightmares simply call home, and from here, it makes sense to keep going. As you move farther away from the surface, something subtle but profound begins to happen. The ocean does not suddenly turn dark in a dramatic, cinematic way. There is no clear line where brightness ends and darkness begins. Instead, light thins out gradually, stretched and filtered by water until it becomes something fragile and unreliable. Colours disappear one by one. Reds vanish first, then oranges and yellows, until eventually even blues fade into a muted grey before surrendering entirely. By the time you reach a few hundred meters below the surface, sunlight is no longer a dependable presence. It arrives weak, scattered, and incomplete, like a memory of brightness rather than brightness itself. This fading of light marks one of the most important transitions in the ocean, not just visually, but biologically. Life above depends heavily on sunlight, either directly through photosynthesis or indirectly through food chains built upon it. Once sunlight can no longer reach, those familiar rules collapse. Plants cannot grow, algae cannot thrive, the energy that fuels most surface ecosystems simply stops arriving, and yet life continues. The region where sunlight becomes scarce is sometimes called the twilight zone, an appropriate name for a place that exists in between. It is not fully dark, but it is no longer truly lit. Shadows lose their sharpness. Movement becomes harder to track. In this zone, many animals develop large eyes, not because they want to see clearly, but because they are desperate to see anything at all. Every faint glimmer matters. Every reflection could mean food, or danger, or nothing at all. Below this twilight region lies a boundary that sunlight never crosses. No matter how bright the day is above, no matter how clear the water, the sun cannot reach this depth. From here onward, the ocean exists in a state of permanent night. There are no mornings or evenings, no seasonal changes in brightness, no shadows cast by passing clouds. Time, as measured by light, becomes irrelevant. For creatures that live here, darkness is not an absence, it is the default condition. Their bodies, senses, and behaviours are built around the assumption that light does not exist unless something nearby produces it. This single fact reshapes life in ways that are difficult to overstate. Vision, which dominates human perception, becomes unreliable. Some species abandon it almost entirely. Eyes shrink, lose complexity, or disappear. Maintaining complex visual organs requires energy, and in an environment where food is scarce, unnecessary energy expenditure is a liability. Other species take the opposite approach. Their eyes grow disproportionately large, sensitive enough to detect the faintest trace of movement or glow. These eyes often look unsettling to human observers, not because they are aggressive, but because they are optimized for a world we never experience. The darkness also removes a familiar sense of orientation. On land, gravity and light help define up and down. In the deep ocean, those cues weaken. There is no ground in the usual sense, only open water extending in all directions. Some creatures drift almost motionless, conserving energy and waiting for food to come to them. Others move slowly and deliberately, navigating by pressure changes, chemical cues, or vibrations rather than sight. Food in this lightless world arrives unpredictably. Most of it comes from above in the form of sinking debris, dead plankton, fragments of plants, waste matter, and the occasional larger carcass fall downward in a slow, constant drizzle, sometimes referred to as marine snow. It is not snow in the traditional sense, but the comparison is apt. The particles are small, scattered, and uneven. Some days bring more than others. Nothing is guaranteed. This scarcity shapes bodies in ways that can appear extreme. Mouths become large relative to body size because when food appears, it must be captured and consumed quickly. Teeth become long, sharp, and inward curving to prevent prey from escaping once caught. Stomachs become expandable, capable of holding meals much larger than the animal would normally encounter. These features are not signs of aggression. They are signs of opportunism. In the absence of light, camouflage changes meaning. On the surface, blending in often means matching colours or patterns. In the deep, where colour is meaningless, camouflage is about silhouette and reflection. Many animals are dark or transparent, minimizing contrast against the black background. Some are silvery, reflecting what little light exists in a way that makes their outlines harder to detect. Others are almost gelatinous, their bodies reducing visual presence to the bare minimum. This environment also changes how predators and prey interact. Without light, speed becomes less important than efficiency. Chases are rare, ambush is common. Some animals lure prey toward them using faint glows or subtle movements. Others rely on patience, drifting quietly until something comes close enough to capture. The deep ocean rewards stillness and restraint. Temperature plays a role as well. Sunlight warms the surface layers of the ocean, but deep water remains cold, often just a few degrees above freezing. Cold slows chemical reactions, metabolism slow, growth rates decrease. Many deep-sea animals live longer than their surface counterparts, aging at a pace that feels almost suspended. In such an environment, rushing accomplishes very little. The absence of sunlight also means the absence of daily rhythms tied to light. On the surface, organisms synchronize their behavior with day and night. In the deep ocean, those cycles disappear. Some species maintain internal rhythms linked to tides or food availability. Others operate on no obvious schedule at all. Activity happens when conditions allow, not when a clock dictates. To humans, this constant darkness can feel oppressive. We associate light with safety and awareness. Darkness, especially total darkness, triggers unease. Our brains evolved to treat unseen spaces as potential threats. When we see images of deep-sea creatures illuminated by artificial lights, that reaction is amplified. The contrast between our expectations and their reality is stark. We are visitors in a world not designed for us. It's important to remember that these creatures are rarely seen as they truly are. Most images come from brief encounters, lit by harsh beams from submersibles. The sudden light can alter behavior, distort colors, and exaggerate features. What looks menacing under artificial illumination may be neutral or even invisible in its natural state. The nightmare quality is often a product of context, not intention. There is also a misconception that the deep ocean is empty, a barren void with occasional monsters drifting through it. In reality, it is structured and layered, with its own ecosystems and interactions. Life is less dense than at the surface, but it is far from absent. Each depth range supports organisms uniquely suited to its conditions. The farther down you go, the more specialized those organisms become. Chemical cues replace visual ones. Smell and taste, in a broad sense, become critical. Many deep-sea animals can detect minute traces of chemicals dissolved in water, allowing them to locate food or mates over long distances. Pressure-sensitive organs help them sense movement and orientation. These senses, largely invisible to us, form a rich sensory world that does not rely on light. Reproduction in darkness also follows different rules. Finding a mate is difficult when individuals are spread out and visibility is limited. Some species produce light to signal potential partners. Others release chemical signals. Some even carry both male and female reproductive organs, reducing the need to find a partner at all. These strategies can look strange through a human lens, but they are practical responses to isolation. As we move deeper into this discussion, it becomes clearer that the darkness of the deep ocean is not a backdrop. It is an active force shaping life at every level. It dictates form, behavior, and even lifespan. It removes options and rewards creativity. What survives here does so because it fits the conditions precisely, not because it resembles anything familiar. This is why the creatures that emerge from these depths often feel so unsettling. They are honest expressions of an environment that has no use for surface-level aesthetics. They are shaped by absence, by pressure, by cold, and by time stretching differently than we expect. The darkness strips life down to function, and what remains can look severe when viewed out of context. As your mind adjusts to this idea, the initial shock begins to soften. The deep ocean stops being a place of horror and starts becoming a place of logic, one with rules that make sense once you accept the premises. No light means no colour. Scarce food means no waste. Constant pressure means flexibility. Stillness becomes strategy. From here, it becomes easier to understand why certain features recur again and again among deep-sea species. The same solutions appear in unrelated lineages because the environment pushes evolution in similar directions. The darkness acts as a filter, allowing only certain designs to persist. And with that understanding in place, it becomes possible to look more closely at the forces that shape these animals beyond darkness alone. Pressure, scarcity, and survival all intertwine here, each adding another layer to the story. The ocean may never touch sunlight at these depths, but it is far from inactive. It is constantly shaping life in quiet, relentless ways, inviting us to keep descending, one adaptation at a time. As the descent continues, darkness is no longer the most dominant sensation, it is simply assumed. What begins to assert itself instead is pressure, an invisible force that increases steadily, relentlessly, and without exception. Unlike darkness, which our minds can at least imagine by closing our eyes, pressure is harder to conceptualize. It has no colour, no sound, no obvious boundary, and yet it defines nearly every rule of survival in the deep ocean. Pressure in the ocean is not dramatic in how it arrives. There is no moment where it suddenly becomes dangerous. It accumulates quietly. For every 10 meters of depth, another atmosphere of pressure is added. That means the weight of the air we live under at sea level stacks again and again, pressing inward from all directions. By the time you reach depths where many deep-sea creatures live, the pressure is hundreds, sometimes thousands of times greater than what the human body is designed to tolerate. For humans, this is an absolute limit. Without specialized equipment, our bodies simply cannot function. Gases compress, cavities collapse, proteins begin to behave differently. It is not a matter of discomfort, but incompatibility. And yet, life not only exists under these conditions, it thrives in ways that feel almost casual, as if the pressure were barely worth mentioning. The reason lies in how deeply pressure shapes biology from the inside out. Deep-sea organisms are not resisting pressure, they are built around it. Their bodies do not fight compression, they accept it. This distinction matters. Resistance requires rigidity, and rigidity breaks. Acceptance allows flexibility, and flexibility survives. One of the first things pressure changes is structure. Bones, as we know them, become less useful. Air-filled spaces are liabilities. Many deep-sea animals have reduced skeletal systems or none at all. Their bodies are soft, pliable, sometimes gelatinous. To surface eyes, this softness can look unfinished or fragile, but in reality it is strength. When pressure presses evenly from all sides, a flexible body distributes that force rather than shattering under it. This is why so many deep-sea creatures appear misshapen when brought to the surface. The pressure they are adapted to suddenly vanishes, and their tissues expand, rupture, or collapse in unfamiliar ways. What looks grotesque or unnatural in those moments is not their true form. It is the result of being removed from the environment that gives them shape. Pressure also alters chemistry. At high pressures, molecules behave differently. Proteins can fold incorrectly. Cell membranes can lose their integrity. To survive, deep-sea organisms have evolved biochemical adaptations that stabilize these processes. Their enzymes function optimally under conditions that would disrupt surface-dwelling life. Their cell membranes contain different proportions of fats, maintaining flexibility where ours would become rigid or leaky. These changes are not cosmetic. They operate at a level far removed from anything we can see, and yet they influence everything that follows, from how fast an animal can move to how often it can reproduce. Pressure slows things down. Chemical reactions take longer. Energy is used cautiously. Life adopts a pace that feels unhurried, not out of choice, but necessity. Darkness and pressure together remove the option of speed. Fast movement requires energy. Energy requires food. Food is scarce. In this environment, survival favours patience over pursuit. Many deep-sea animals spend large portions of their lives drifting, waiting, conserving. Movement is deliberate, purposeful, and often minimal. This slow pace can be unsettling to imagine. We associate survival with action, with constant effort. The deep ocean operates on a different philosophy. Here, doing less is often the smartest choice. Waiting is not passive, it is strategic. The rules of survival shift accordingly. Instead of outrunning predators, animals avoid detection. Instead of hunting actively, they exploit opportunity. Instead of frequent meals, they prepare for rare ones. This is why mouths are often large and stomachs expandable. When food finally arrives, there is no guarantee it will come again soon. Pressure reinforces this strategy. Muscles under high pressure behave differently. Fast contractions become inefficient. Sustained effort becomes costly. Deep-sea animals tend to have less muscle mass relative to their size, and what muscle they do have is optimized for brief, controlled movements rather than bursts of speed. Even sensory systems adapt to this reality. In darkness, vision becomes unreliable. Pressure, however, carries information. Changes in pressure can signal movement nearby. Vibrations travel through water efficiently. Many deep-sea species are exquisitely sensitive to these cues, detecting shifts that surface animals would never notice. This creates a world where awareness does not depend on seeing, but sensing. The boundary between predator and prey becomes blurred, not by confusion, but by subtlety. An animal might know something is nearby without knowing exactly what it is. Decisions are made with incomplete information, favouring caution. Another consequence of pressure is isolation. At great depths, populations are often sparse. Individuals may go long periods without encountering another of their kind. This shapes reproduction in profound ways. Some species produce bioluminescent signals to attract mates in the dark. Others rely on chemical trails. Some reduce the problem entirely by becoming both male and female, ensuring that any encounter can result in reproduction. These solutions can look strange when judged by surface standards, but they are elegant responses to an environment that offers no shortcuts. Pressure does not allow waste. Darkness does not allow excess. Every trait must earn its place. The deep ocean also enforces stability. Unlike surface environments which change constantly with weather, seasons, and sunlight, deep-sea conditions are remarkably consistent. Temperature remains low, pressure remains high, darkness remains total. This stability allows for long-term specialization. Once an organism becomes well adapted, there is little pressure to change further. This can result in lineages that persist with relatively little modification for millions of years. In some cases, deep-sea species resemble ancient forms long extinct elsewhere. They are not primitive, they are conserved. Their environment does not demand reinvention. This conservation contributes to the unsettling feeling these animals evoke. We are looking at design shaped by deep time, not recent innovation. Their features do not align with modern expectations because they were never meant to. They are solutions to problems we no longer encounter. Pressure also changes how death works. On the surface, dead organisms are quickly recycled. Scavengers arrive. Decomposition accelerates. In the deep ocean, a large carcass can become a long-lasting resource, supporting entire communities for years. These so-called falls create temporary oases of abundance in an otherwise sparse environment. When such events occur, the rules shift briefly. Competition increases, activity rises. But once the resource is exhausted, the system settles back into its slow equilibrium. The deep ocean is patient even with abundance. Understanding this rhythm helps reframe the appearance of deep-sea creatures. Their so-called monstrous features are not signs of aggression or excess. They are tools for navigating a world where opportunities are rare and conditions unforgiving. Large teeth are not weapons of terror. They are insurance against loss. Soft bodies are not weakness. They are resilience. From a human perspective, this can be difficult to internalize. We are used to environments that forgive mistakes. We can waste energy. We can recover from inefficiency. The deep ocean offers no such comfort. It rewards precision and punishes excess over long spans of time. As your mind settles into these rules, the imagery begins to shift. The darkness becomes less threatening and more neutral. The pressure becomes less oppressive and more structural. The creatures that live here stop being symbols of fear and start becoming examples of adaptation taken to its logical extreme. This reframing does not make them familiar, but it makes them comprehensible. And comprehension has a way of dulling fear. What once looked like a nightmare starts to look like a blueprint, one drawn by an environment that does not negotiate. From here, it becomes natural to ask why these adaptations look the way they do, why certain features appear again and again, why beauty, as we define it, seems absent. To answer that, it helps to examine a concept we rarely question, usefulness, and how it changes when survival is stripped down to its essentials. The deep ocean does not care how something looks, it cares whether it works. And that single priority reshapes life in ways that challenge our assumptions at every turn, inviting us to keep going deeper into the logic that governs this lightless world. As the environment becomes more extreme, certain ideas quietly fall away. One of the first is beauty, at least as humans usually understand it. Symmetry, bright coloration, graceful movement, and decorative features all lose their relevance when the conditions no longer reward them. In the deep ocean, beauty does not disappear because evolution becomes careless. It disappears because beauty costs energy, and energy is the rarest resource of all. On the surface, many animals benefit from being visually striking. Bright colours can attract mates, warn predators, or help individuals recognize members of their own species. Patterns can confuse attackers. Smooth, streamlined shapes can signal health and strength. These traits persist because they offer advantages in a world where light is abundant, and food, while not unlimited, is generally accessible enough to support such displays. In the deep ocean, those assumptions collapse. Light is absent. Visual signals become meaningless beyond a short distance if they function at all. A bright colour cannot attract attention if no one can see it. An elaborate pattern wastes pigments that require energy to produce and maintain. Even symmetry, often associated with health, offers little advantage when movement is slow and encounters are rare. This does not mean that deep-sea creatures are poorly designed. Quite the opposite. Their designs are stripped down to what is strictly necessary. When you remove every trait that does not contribute directly to survival, what remains can look severe, exaggerated, or unsettling, especially when judged by surface standards. Consider pigmentation. Many deep-sea animals are either very dark or nearly transparent. In darkness, colour serves no purpose except when interacting with artificial light. Producing pigments requires resources, and in a food-limited environment, those resources are better spent elsewhere. Transparency, in particular, is an efficient solution. If there is nothing to reflect or absorb light, then there is little to see. To human observers, transparency can feel eerie. We are accustomed to bodies that conceal their inner workings. Seeing organs, bones, or internal structures feels like a violation of an unspoken rule. In the deep ocean, there is no such rule. Visibility is not a concern. Function is. The same applies to body shape. On land and near the surface, streamlined forms often signal speed and efficiency. In the deep, speed is rarely useful. Energy spent accelerating is energy lost. Many deep-sea animals have shapes that look awkward or inflated, not because they are inefficient, but because they are optimized for buoyancy and minimal effort. Neutral buoyancy allows an organism to hover without swimming, conserving energy over long periods. This often results in bodies that appear bloated or loose, especially when brought to the surface. But in their native environment, these forms are perfectly balanced, drifting effortlessly in the water column. What looks ungainly to us is, in fact, a solution to gravity without the need for constant movement. Facial features are another area where beauty gives way to necessity. Human faces are expressive, symmetrical, and relatively compact. Deep-sea creatures often have faces that seem exaggerated beyond reason. Eyes may be enormous or absent. Mouths may extend far beyond what looks proportional. Teeth may protrude outward or curve inward in ways that appear threatening. These features are not aesthetic choices, they are responses to scarcity. A large mouth increases the range of possible prey. Long teeth prevent escape. Reduced facial structure saves energy and space. When meals are infrequent, the ability to consume whatever becomes available outweighs any concern for balance or elegance. Even behaviours associated with beauty, such as courtship displays, change dramatically. On the surface, elaborate rituals can afford to evolve because individuals encounter each other regularly. In the deep ocean, encounters are rare. Courtship must be efficient. Signals must travel far or persist long enough to matter. In some cases, the solution is light. In others, it is chemistry. In still others, it is the complete elimination of choice. Some species abandon traditional mating altogether. They fuse permanently with partners when they find them. Others reproduce opportunistically whenever conditions allow. These strategies may seem unsettling from a human perspective, but they remove uncertainty in an environment where uncertainty is costly. The loss of beauty also reflects the loss of redundancy. On the surface, having extra capacity can be beneficial. Extra fat reserves, additional sensory input, or ornamental features may not be strictly necessary, but they are affordable. In the deep, redundancy is a liability. Carrying more than you need means consuming more than you can reliably replace. This leads to bodies that appear incomplete to us. Limbs may be reduced. Organs may be simplified. Structures that serve multiple functions are favoured over those with single purposes. The result can feel alien, as if these animals are missing something essential. In reality, they are missing only what they do not need. There is also a psychological element to how we perceive beauty. Humans tend to associate familiarity with comfort. The closer something resembles known forms, the more acceptable it feels. Deep-sea creatures violate these expectations. Their proportions are unfamiliar, their textures are unusual, their movements are slow or erratic in ways that don't align with our instincts. This mismatch triggers discomfort. We interpret unfamiliarity as threat, even when none exists. The term nightmare reflects this reaction more than it reflects the animals themselves. These creatures are not designed to frighten. They are simply not designed to reassure. It's also worth considering that much of what we see is distorted by context. Deep-sea animals are usually viewed under harsh artificial lighting, isolated from their environment, often injured or stressed. The sudden illumination exaggerates textures and shadows. The lack of scale makes proportions hard to judge. A feature that looks monstrous up close may be subtle or barely noticeable in the dark. In their natural setting, these animals are rarely meant to be seen clearly. Their forms blend into the surrounding water. Their movements are minimal. Their presence is quiet. The nightmare quality emerges only when they are dragged into a world that was never meant to contain them. This idea extends beyond appearance. Beauty, as humans define it, often includes grace, fluidity, and expressiveness. In the deep ocean, movement is economical. There is no wasted flourish. A tail flick is calculated. A mouth opens only when necessary. Stillness is not laziness but survival. Over time, this economy produces life that feels emotionally distant. There is little playfulness, little obvious interaction. Everything appears serious, purposeful. To us, this can feel cold or hostile, but it's simply life operating under different constraints. When beauty stops being useful, something else takes its place. Precision, efficiency, reliability. These qualities are less immediately appealing, but they're deeply impressive once understood. They represent adaptation at its most uncompromising. As this realization settles in, the framing begins to shift again. The deep ocean stops being a gallery of horrors and starts becoming a catalogue of solutions. Each unsettling feature answers a specific problem. Each departure from beauty reflects a trade-off that favoured survival over appearance. This understanding prepares the ground for looking more closely at individual traits that often trigger the strongest reactions. Teeth, jaws, and feeding structures are among the most striking examples. They're frequently cited as proof that deep-sea creatures are somehow monstrous. In reality, they are some of the clearest illustrations of how usefulness replaces beauty when the margin for error disappears. With that in mind, it makes sense to focus next on one of the most visually arresting features of life in the deep, not as symbols of fear, but as records of scarcity written directly onto the body. When people describe deep-sea creatures as nightmares, they almost always start with the face. Not the body, not the movement, but the face. The eyes, the mouth, the proportions that seem to defy any familiar template. Faces are where humans look first when judging intent, emotion, and safety. We are wired to read meaning into them instantly. A face that fits our expectations feels approachable. A face that doesn't can trigger discomfort before we have time to think. In the deep ocean, faces are shaped by rules that have nothing to do with communication, expression, or reassurance. They are shaped by darkness, distance, and chance. The result is a collection of forms that feel deeply wrong to human intuition, not because they signal danger, but because they signal nothing we know how to interpret. On land and near the surface, faces evolve to be read. Eyes signal attention, mouths signal threat, hunger, or calm. Subtle movements convey social information. Even in animals very different from us, there is usually something recognizable, a shared logic of placement and proportion. Two eyes facing forward suggest a predator. Eyes on the side suggest vigilance. A small mouth suggests grazing. These patterns are familiar because they evolved under similar constraints. In the deep ocean, those constraints dissolve. Faces no longer need to be read. They only need to function. Darkness removes the audience. There is no one watching most of the time. There is no need to signal friendliness, dominance, or health. When encounters happen, they are brief, close, and often final. In such conditions, facial features stop serving social roles and become tools. This is why eyes, when present, often dominate the face. In some species, they are disproportionately large, bulging outward, occupying most of the head. This can look grotesque to us, as if the face were unfinished or swollen, but in darkness, surface area matters. A larger eye can collect more light. Even a tiny improvement in sensitivity can mean the difference between detecting movement and missing it entirely. These eyes are not designed to see clearly. They are designed to detect contrast, motion, and faint glimmers. Sharpness is sacrificed for sensitivity. Colour vision is often lost entirely. The eye becomes less like a camera and more like a light detector. To human observers, this creates an uncanny effect. We see eyes that seem to stare without seeing, large and glassy, offering no emotional feedback. In other cases, eyes are reduced or absent. If light is so scarce that even enlarged eyes provide little benefit, maintaining them becomes wasteful. Tissue that does not contribute to survival is gradually minimized. The result can be a face with smooth skin where eyes might be expected, or small dark patches that serve limited sensory roles. To us, this absence feels unsettling, as if something essential were missing. But from an evolutionary perspective, it is simply efficiency. Mouths, too, are often exaggerated. Many deep-sea animals have mouths that extend far beyond what looks proportional to their heads. Some can open wide enough to engulf prey nearly as large as themselves. Teeth may be long, needle-like, and angled inward. Lips are thin or non-existent. The overall effect can feel aggressive, even monstrous. This reaction says more about us than about the animal. We associate large mouths and visible teeth with threat because on the surface, those features often accompany active predators. In the deep ocean, they accompany opportunity. When food is rare, being able to consume whatever appears is critical. A small, neat mouth limits options. A large one expands them. The teeth themselves are not designed for chewing or tearing in the way we expect. They are designed for retention. Once prey is captured, it must not escape. Long, inward curving teeth create a one-way system. Entry is easy, exit is not. This design minimizes struggle and energy loss. From a survival standpoint, it is elegant. From a human aesthetic standpoint, it is disturbing. Another feature that often triggers discomfort is asymmetry. Many deep-sea faces lack the balanced proportions we subconsciously associate with health. Eyes may be uneven, jaws may curve, structures may appear misplaced. On the surface, symmetry is often a sign of developmental stability. In the deep, symmetry offers a little advantage. As long as a structure works, its exact placement matters less. This can produce faces that feel improvised, as if assembled without a plan. But there is a plan. It is simply not one that values visual harmony. Texture also plays a role. Deep-sea skin can be rough, gelatinous, translucent, or unusually smooth. Scales may be reduced or absent. Protective armour, common in shallow water, becomes less useful where encounters are rare and pressure is constant. Soft tissue withstands compression better than rigid structures. To human eyes, softness can look vulnerable or unfinished, especially when illuminated harshly. The lack of familiar textures removes another layer of comfort. We expect skin to behave in certain ways, to reflect light predictably, to hide what lies beneath. When those expectations are violated, the face becomes harder to categorize, and the mind fills the gap with unease. It's also important to consider scale. Most images of deep-sea creatures are close-ups taken in isolation. Without context, proportions become exaggerated. A mouth that seems enormous may belong to an animal only a few inches long. An eye that looks oversized may be appropriate for the body size and environment. Our brains are poor at judging scale without reference points, and the deep ocean rarely provides any. The lighting compounds this problem. Artificial lights flatten shadows in some places and deepen them in others. Features that would blend into darkness become stark. Surfaces that would normally absorb light reflect it sharply. Faces appear harsher, more angular, more extreme than they would in their natural setting. In darkness, these faces are rarely meant to be seen. They are meant to function quietly, briefly, efficiently. The idea that a face should be pleasant or expressive simply does not apply. There is also the matter of emotion. Humans instinctively search for emotion in faces. We look for eyes that focus, mouths that curve, muscles that signal intent. Deep-sea faces offer little of this. Their expressions, if they can be called that, are static. Movement is minimal. There is no obvious feedback. This emotional blankness can feel threatening. We are uncomfortable with faces that do not respond. But this is not hostility. It is absence. These animals are not social in the way we are. They do not need to communicate reassurance or aggression visually. Their interactions are governed by proximity and opportunity, not expression. In some cases, the face becomes almost unrecognizable as a face at all. Structures merge. Sensory organs blend into the head. What we interpret as a face may be nothing more than an opening for feeding and sensing, arranged in the most efficient configuration possible. Our discomfort arises because we insist on seeing a face where none was intended. This insistence is deeply human. Faces are central to how we understand the world. They are tied to identity, trust, and empathy. When we encounter something that violates our facial expectations, we experience a kind of cognitive dissonance. The label nightmare emerges as a way to resolve that discomfort quickly. But if we slow down and adjust our expectations, something else becomes visible. These faces are records. They document the pressures of an environment that strips away everything unnecessary. They show what happens when survival is the only metric that matters. Each exaggerated feature tells a story. Large eyes speak of darkness. Wide mouths speak of scarcity. Reduced structure speaks of pressure. What looks like excess is often compensation. What looks like deformity is often optimization. This reframing does not make the faces familiar. They remain strange. But the strangeness becomes informative rather than alarming. It becomes possible to see these faces not as errors, but as outcomes, the natural result of life adapting to a world that does not resemble our own. As this understanding settles in, it becomes easier to move past the initial reaction and ask deeper questions. Why do certain facial traits recur across unrelated species? Why do mouths and teeth become such dominant features? Why does feeding seem to define so much of deep-sea anatomy? The answer lies not in fear, but in economics. In the deep ocean, every encounter with food matters. Every opportunity must be maximized. Faces become feeding tools first and sensory tools second. Everything else is optional. This leads naturally to the next layer of adaptation, one that often draws even stronger reactions than faces alone. Teeth, jaws, and feeding mechanisms dominate many deep-sea forms, not because these animals are more violent, but because scarcity leaves little room for restraint. Understanding that shift requires looking closely at how food shapes life in the deep, and how survival rewrites anatomy around a single, relentless question. When will the next meal come? And will you be ready when it does? In the deep ocean, food is not a guarantee. It is a possibility, an interruption, a rare event that shapes everything around it. This single fact explains more about deep-sea anatomy than almost any other. When resources are scarce and unpredictable, survival becomes a matter of readiness rather than pursuit. You do not chase meals, you wait for them, and when they arrive, you cannot afford to hesitate. This is where teeth and jaws stop being mere body parts and start functioning like economic instruments. They are investments made under extreme conditions, shaped by a system where supply is unreliable and demand is constant. Every calorie matters. Every opportunity counts. Waste is not forgiven. On the surface, many animals eat frequently. Meals are smaller, regular, and often replaceable. If one opportunity is missed, another will come. This allows for selectivity. Animals can afford to ignore prey that is too large, too small, too dangerous, or too inconvenient. They can evolve specialized diets, refined feeding techniques, and even preferences. In the deep ocean, selectivity is risky. You do not know when the next opportunity will arrive. The prey drifting into range today might be the only nourishment you see for weeks, months, or longer. Under these conditions, versatility beats precision. Anything that can be swallowed safely becomes food. This is why jaws in the deep often appear oversized, flexible, or disproportionate. A large mouth increases the range of possible prey. A flexible jaw allows ingestion of objects larger than the head itself. Ligaments stretch. Bones shift. Structures that look unstable to us are designed to accommodate extremes without breaking. To human eyes, this can look excessive. A fish with a mouth that opens impossibly wide seems like a caricature of predation. But that mouth is not built for frequent use. It is built for rare success. It exists for the moment when something finally comes close enough, not for everyday feeding. Teeth follow the same logic. On the surface, teeth often serve multiple functions: cutting, grinding, tearing, signalling. In the deep, their role is simpler: hold on, prevent escape, reduce struggle. Long needle-like teeth penetrate easily. Inward angled teeth create resistance in one direction only. Once prey moves past them, retreat becomes nearly impossible. This design minimizes energy expenditure. A prolonged struggle costs calories and increases risk. A clean capture conserves both. From an efficiency standpoint, these teeth are not brutal. They are practical. The appearance of aggression is misleading. Most deep-sea predators do not actively hunt in the way we imagine. They do not pursue prey over long distances. They do not rely on speed or endurance. Instead, they rely on proximity and timing. The jaw is deployed only when conditions are right. This waiting strategy is reinforced by the environment itself. Darkness limits detection range. Pressure discourages rapid movement. Cold slows reactions. All of these factors favor ambush over chase. The mouth becomes a trap rather than a weapon. Some deep-sea jaws are so loosely connected that they can swing outward, allowing the mouth to expand dramatically. This flexibility can look unnatural, as if the face were coming apart. In reality, it is controlled and purposeful. The jaw returns to its resting position once feeding is complete, conserving energy until the next opportunity arises. Stomachs too reflect this economic reality. Many deep-sea animals have expandable stomachs capable of holding meals far larger than what they would normally encounter. This is not gluttony. It is insurance. When food is rare, storing it internally is safer than relying on future availability. Digestion itself is slow. The cold environment reduces metabolic speed. Nutrients are extracted gradually, maximizing return on investment. There is no rush to move on to the next meal because there may not be one. This slow processing also affects growth. Many deep-sea species grow slowly and live long lives. They are not racing toward reproduction. They are pacing themselves through scarcity. Teeth and jaws in this context are not signs of aggression or dominance. They are tools for patience. From a human perspective, teeth are emotionally charged. We associate them with danger, violence, and threat. Visible teeth often signal intent. In the deep ocean, visibility is irrelevant. Teeth are not displayed. They're hidden until needed. The fact that we see them at all is usually the result of artificial lighting or unusual encounters. When illuminated suddenly, these structures can look alarming. The contrast between darkness and exposed teeth triggers instinctive fear responses. But in their natural state, these teeth are rarely visible to anything at all. There's also a misconception that deep-sea animals are constantly hungry or aggressive. In reality, many spend long periods inactive. Their physiology supports endurance rather than urgency. The jaw waits. The teeth wait. Hunger is a constant background condition, not an emergency. This distinction matters because it reframes how we interpret these features. The deep ocean is not filled with predators constantly searching for prey. It is filled with organisms prepared for opportunity. The jaw is readiness made visible. Another factor shaping teeth and jaws is unpredictability of prey size. On the surface, predators often specialize. They target specific prey types and sizes. In the deep, specialization can be limiting. Prey arrives by chance, not abundance. It may be small planktonic animals drifting fish, or fragments of larger carcasses sinking from above. A versatile jaw accommodates this randomness. It does not need to be precise. It needs to be adaptable. This adaptability often comes at the cost of aesthetics. Structures become exaggerated because moderation serves no purpose. This also explains why some deep-sea animals appear to have more teeth than necessary. Redundancy ensures success. If one tooth breaks, others remain. If prey thrashes, there are multiple points of contact. In an environment where repair is slow and replacement costly, redundancy is a form of resilience. Human judgment tends to label such designs as excessive or grotesque because we evaluate them through a lens shaped by abundance. We live in environments where resources are frequent enough that restraint becomes a virtue. In the deep ocean, restraint is a liability. The economics of scarcity do not reward moderation, they reward preparedness. Even species that feed on very small prey follow this logic. Filter feeders in the deep often have wide mouths and specialized structures to capture whatever particles pass by. They do not choose what they eat, they accept what arrives. The mouth becomes an open gate rather than a selective instrument. This acceptance extends beyond feeding into behavior. Many deep-sea animals do not actively avoid prey that could harm them. They assess risk differently. A meal that carries danger may still be worth taking if the alternative is starvation. Teeth and jaws reflect this calculation. They are designed to minimize loss, not eliminate risk. There is also a temporal aspect to this economy. Time itself is stretched in the deep. Processes unfold slowly. Recovery takes longer. A missed meal can have consequences that echo for months. This increases the value of each opportunity and reinforces the need for reliable capture mechanisms. Understanding this helps dissolve the idea that deep-sea creatures are inherently violent or monstrous. Their anatomy is not an expression of aggression, it is an expression of arithmetic. How much energy is available, how often it arrives, how much can be conserved. Once this perspective settles in, the imagery shifts again. Teeth stop looking like threats and start looking like tools. Jaws stop looking exaggerated and start looking appropriate. The nightmare quality fades into something closer to inevitability. This does not mean the deep ocean becomes comfortable. It remains harsh, indifferent, and unforgiving. But it becomes intelligible. The logic behind its creatures becomes visible, and with that logic in place, another pattern begins to stand out. Teeth and jaws are only one part of how scarcity reshapes perception. Eyes too change under these conditions, sometimes becoming enormous, sometimes disappearing entirely. Their role in a world where light is rare adds another layer to understanding why deep-sea life looks the way it does. Moving from mouths to eyes shifts the focus from consumption to awareness, from capturing opportunity to detecting it in the first place. In a world where seeing is difficult and sometimes pointless, eyes evolve along paths that feel just as unsettling, but follow the same underlying rule. When resources are scarce, every sense must justify its cost. In a world without sunlight, eyes face a fundamental question. Is seeing worth the cost? Vision is one of the most energy-hungry senses an organism can maintain. Eyes require constant upkeep. Neural processing demands fuel. Photoreceptor cells must be repaired and replaced. On the surface, where light is abundant and visual information is rich, the investment pays off. In the deep ocean, where photons are rare and darkness is the rule, vision becomes a gamble. This is why deep-sea eyes tend to fall into two extreme categories. They either become extraordinarily sensitive, pushing the limits of what biological tissue can detect, or they begin to disappear altogether. There is very little middle ground. Half measures are expensive and ineffective. In the deep, a sense must either justify itself completely or step aside. To understand this shift, it helps to let go of how humans think about seeing. Our eyes are built for clarity, colour and detail. We use vision to recognise faces, read expressions, navigate complex environments and interpret subtle changes in light. None of that is necessary in the deep ocean. There are no landscapes to admire, no distant objects to track, no written symbols to decipher. Vision, if it exists at all, serves a much narrower purpose. For some deep-sea animals, eyes grow to astonishing sizes relative to their heads. This enlargement is not about sharp vision. It is about collecting light. Any light. Even a single photon can matter. These eyes function more like light traps than cameras. They gather faint glimmers produced by bioluminescent organisms or reflected from passing bodies. The goal is not to see an object clearly, but to know that something is there. This sensitivity often comes at the expense of resolution. The image formed may be blurry, lacking detail, but detail is less important than detection. In darkness, knowing that movement exists nearby is more valuable than knowing exactly what it looks like. Reaction time matters more than recognition. To human observers, these eyes can look unsettling. They appear oversized, glassy, sometimes bulging outward as if under strain. We are accustomed to eyes that sit neatly within a face, proportional and expressive. Deep-sea eyes break those expectations. They dominate the head, leaving little room for other features. The face seems reduced to a single function. This reduction can feel eerie. Eyes are central to human empathy. We read emotion, intent, and awareness through them. When eyes do not behave as expected, when they do not track movement or express emotion, they feel vacant or alien. But deep-sea eyes are not meant to communicate. They are meant to detect. Some species take this sensitivity even further by tuning their eyes to specific wavelengths of light. In the deep ocean, most bioluminescent light falls within a narrow range, often blue or green. By specializing their photoreceptors to detect these wavelengths, animals increase their chances of noticing prey, predators, or mates. Color vision becomes irrelevant. Precision gives way to optimization. Other species make a different calculation. They reduce their eyes or lose them entirely. If light is so scarce that even the most sensitive eyes provide little advantage, then maintaining them becomes wasteful. Energy saved by abandoning vision can be redirected to other systems, such as smell, pressure detection, or chemical sensing. This loss of eyes often triggers strong reactions in humans. We associate blindness with vulnerability. An eyeless face feels incomplete, deprived, or damaged. But in the deep ocean, blindness is not a handicap if vision offers no useful information. It is simply an acknowledgement of reality. These eyeless or reduced eye species often possess other sensory adaptations that are far more informative in darkness. They may detect vibrations through their skin, they may sense chemical gradients in the water, they may perceive subtle changes in pressure caused by nearby movement. These sensors operate continuously, without the need for light. From a survival standpoint, this can be more reliable than vision. Light can be misleading. Bioluminescence can be used as a lure. Shadows can deceive. Chemical and mechanical cues, by contrast, offer direct information about presence and proximity. The trade-off between eyes and other senses highlights a deeper principle at work. In the deep ocean, perception is expensive. Every sensory system competes for limited resources. Evolution favours the senses that provide the greatest return on investment. This competition also explains why some species possess eyes that seem oddly positioned or shaped. Tubular eyes that look upward, eyes set far apart, eyes that are fixed rather than movable. These configurations optimize detection for specific scenarios. Looking upward makes sense when most light comes from above, whether from bioluminescent prey or faint residual glow. Mobility is sacrificed for sensitivity. Versatility is traded for efficiency. To human eyes, these configurations look wrong. They break symmetry. They disrupt the familiar face pattern we instinctively search for. But they are precise responses to a specific visual economy. There is also a temporal aspect to deep-sea vision. Many animals are not continuously active. They may spend long periods drifting or resting. Eyes, during these times, still consume energy. Some species reduce visual activity when it is unlikely to be useful, effectively lowering their metabolic cost. Vision becomes episodic rather than constant. This intermittent use further distances deep-sea eyes from our own experience. We rely on continuous visual input. The idea of turning sight on and off feels unnatural. In the deep ocean, it is practical. Another factor shaping eyes is the unpredictability of encounters. In a sparse environment, interactions are rare. When they happen, they are sudden. Vision must be ready to detect change instantly. This favours sensitivity over stability. Eyes become reactive rather than exploratory. This reactivity can give the impression that deep-sea animals are always watching, always alert. In reality, they're conserving energy most of the time. Their sensory systems are tuned to awaken only when something changes. The nightmare impression arises again from mismatch. We expect eyes to look back at us, to acknowledge our presence. Deep-sea eyes do not. They are not scanning for faces, they are scanning for opportunity. When illuminated by human technology, they reflect light back without recognition. The absence of feedback unsettles us. It is worth remembering that most deep-sea creatures will never encounter a human. Their eyes did not evolve with us in mind. Our presence is an anomaly. The discomfort we feel is the result of intrusion, not design. There is also a cultural layer to how we interpret eyes. In many human stories, eyes symbolize awareness, intelligence, and intent. Creatures with unusual eyes are often cast as villains or monsters. This narrative bias influences how we perceive deep-sea life. We project meaning where none exists. When stripped of that projection, the eyes tell a simpler story. They are responses to darkness. They reflect trade-offs made under pressure. They document decisions about energy allocation and risk management. In some cases, eyes become almost invisible, blending into the body. This reduces contrast and minimizes detection. In others, reflective layers amplify faint light, making the eye appear to glow when illuminated. This glow can look eerie, but it is a passive effect, not an active display. Bioluminescence complicates this picture further. In a world without sunlight, light becomes a language. Some species produce light to attract prey. Others use it to confuse predators. Some use it to communicate with their mates. Eyes must be able to detect and interpret these signals. Sensitivity becomes critical. This creates an arms race of sorts. As bioluminescent signals evolve, eyes evolve to detect them. As eyes become more sensitive, signals become subtler. The result is a visual world that operates at the edge of perception, invisible to us without specialized equipment. From a human perspective, this hidden visual economy feels mysterious and unsettling. We are accustomed to seeing the world directly. The idea that an entire sensory landscape exists beyond our perception challenges our sense of understanding. As you sit with this idea, the eyes of deep-sea creatures start to feel less like symbols of horror and more like windows into a different way of experiencing reality. They do not see almost nothing because they are deficient. They see almost everything that matters in their world, and in some cases they see nothing at all because nothing visual is worth seeing. This duality, eyes that see almost nothing or everything, is not a contradiction. It is a reflection of extreme adaptation. The deep ocean does not reward compromise, it rewards clarity of purpose. With vision either pushed to its limits or abandoned entirely, other strategies rise in importance. Light itself becomes a tool. not just something to see by, but something to produce, manipulate, and exploit. When darkness dominates, creating light can change the rules entirely. That shift leads naturally into the next layer of adaptation, where illumination is no longer passive but intentional, and where light becomes one of the most powerful currencies in the deep. In a place where sunlight never arrives, light stops being background and starts becoming an event. It is no longer something that fills the environment. It is something that happens briefly, deliberately, and often with consequences. In the deep ocean, light is rare enough that its appearance alone can change behaviour. It draws attention, it signals opportunity, it creates risk. Under these conditions, light becomes more than illumination. It becomes a tool. Bioluminescence, the ability of living organisms to produce light through chemical reactions, is one of the defining features of deep-sea life. It is also one of the most misunderstood. From the surface, glowing animals are often treated as curiosities, beautiful oddities floating in the dark. But in the deep ocean, bioluminescence is not decoration. It is strategy. Producing light costs energy. The chemical reactions required are not free. In an environment where energy is scarce, any trait that persists must offer a clear advantage. Bioluminescence survives because it changes outcomes. It helps animals find food, avoid becoming food, and occasionally reproduce. Each use reflects a calculated trade-off where the benefits outweigh the cost. One of the most common uses of bioluminescence is attraction. In darkness, movement alone may not be enough to draw attention. A point of light, however faint, can act like a beacon. Some deep-sea predators exploit this by producing light that mimics the appearance of prey. Smaller organisms are drawn toward it, mistaking it for food or a safe gathering point. By the time they realize the mistake, they are already within reach. This tactic feels cruel when described in human terms. Luring prey with false signals carries a moral weight in our stories. In the deep ocean, it is simply efficiency. Deception requires less energy than pursuit. A stationary light costs less than a chase. Scarcity rewards such solutions. Other species use light defensively. Sudden flashes can startle predators, buying time to escape. Bursts of light can disorient attackers, disrupting their ability to track movement. In some cases, animals release clouds of glowing particles, creating confusion in the dark. The predator sees light everywhere and nowhere at once. This use of light as distraction mirrors strategies seen on the surface, such as ink clouds released by octopuses. In the deep, where darkness amplifies contrast, light becomes the equivalent of smoke. It breaks visual continuity and shifts attention. There are also species that use bioluminescence for camouflage, a concept that feels counterintuitive at first. How can producing light help an animal hide? The answer lies in the direction of illumination. In the deep ocean, faint light sometimes filters down from above, either from residual surface glow or from bioluminescent organisms higher in the water column. Predators looking upward may see silhouettes of prey against this dim background. To counter this, some animals produce light on their undersides, matching the intensity of the light above them. This technique, known as counter-illumination, erases the silhouette. The animal blends into the background by glowing just enough to cancel its shadow. It is camouflage achieved not by darkness, but by controlled brightness. To human observers, this is a strange idea. We think of hiding as becoming less visible. In the deep ocean, hiding can mean glowing at precisely the right level. Too much light reveals you. Too little creates contrast. Survival depends on balance. Light also plays a role in communication, though communication in the deep is often minimal and utilitarian. Some species use specific patterns or rhythms of light to signal to others of their kind. These signals may indicate readiness to mate, territorial presence, or simple recognition. They are not elaborate displays, they are brief, efficient exchanges. Because encounters are rare, These signals must be unmistakable. A flash pattern that works in the deep must cut through darkness and ambiguity. There is little room for subtlety. Miscommunication carries a cost. From the outside, these glowing displays can look otherworldly. Patterns appear and disappear without context. Movement seems slow and deliberate. The darkness amplifies the effect, making each point of light feel significant. Our brains, conditioned to associate light with safety, respond emotionally. This emotional response contributes to the nightmare imagery often associated with deep-sea life. Light appearing suddenly in darkness triggers alertness. When that light is attached to a form we do not recognize, the reaction intensifies. But again, this reaction reflects our wiring, not the intent of the organism. It is also important to note that not all bioluminescence is controlled. Some species glow continuously due to the presence of symbiotic bacteria living within their tissues. These bacteria produce light as part of their own metabolism. The host organism benefits by using that light for attraction or camouflage, while the bacteria gain a stable environment and nutrients. It is a partnership shaped by mutual benefit, not by spectacle. The existence of these partnerships underscores how deeply integrated light has become in the deep ocean's economy. Light is not just something animals produce, it is something they outsource, regulate, and adapt to over evolutionary time. The chemical basis of bioluminescence also reflects the constraints of the environment. The reactions must work reliably at low temperatures and high pressures. They must produce light efficiently without excessive heat. This has led to a range of biochemical solutions, each tuned to specific conditions. Diversity emerges not from excess, but from necessity. From a human perspective, the idea of light as a weapon feels unsettling. We associate weapons with intent and aggression. In the deep ocean, a light is not wielded with malice. It is deployed as part of a survival strategy in a world where options are limited. The same glow that attracts prey may also attract predators. Using light always carries risk. This risk reinforces the idea that deep-sea life is not careless or chaotic. It is conservative. Bioluminescent displays are often brief and localized. They are used when the potential gain justifies the exposure. The darkness returns quickly. This restraint contrasts sharply with human use of light. We flood our environments with it, often without thought. In the deep ocean, light is rationed. It is used sparingly, purposefully. Its absence is the norm. There is also a psychological layer to how we perceive glowing organisms. Light emerging from darkness feels like a violation of expectations. It draws focus. It suggests presence. When that presence is unfamiliar, the mind fills in gaps with fear. This is the same mechanism that makes distant lights at night feel ominous, even when they are harmless. Deep-sea creatures do not exploit this fear. They exploit physics and biology. The fact that their strategies overlap with our emotional triggers is incidental. As we consider how light functions in this environment, it becomes clear that bioluminescence is not an embellishment. It is not beauty surviving where beauty is otherwise unnecessary. It is a response to darkness so complete that creating light becomes one of the few ways to influence outcomes. Light becomes currency. It buys attention. It buys confusion. It buys invisibility. It buys connection. Like any currency, it must be spent wisely. Understanding this reframes how glowing deep-sea creatures are perceived. They are not spectacles designed to amaze surface dwellers. They are practitioners of a delicate balance, using light to tip the odds slightly in their favour. As this balance becomes clearer, another pattern emerges. Light, pressure, and scarcity shape not just individual features, but entire bodies. Forms become flexible. Structures stretch and compress. The deep ocean rewards bodies that can endure rather than resist. This brings the focus away from specific tools like eyes and light, and toward the overall architecture of deep-sea life. How bodies themselves are built to survive conditions that would destroy most surface organisms. That story continues not with weapons or senses, but with form, resilience, and the quiet strength of adaptation. In the deep ocean, the body itself becomes the primary adaptation. Before teeth, before eyes, before light or strategy, there is the simple question of whether a body can exist at all under such conditions. Pressure presses inward constantly. Cold slows every process. Darkness removes reference points. In this environment, bodies are not designed to perform impressively. They are designed to persist. Persistence in the deep looks very different from strength as we usually imagine it. On land, endurance is often associated with rigidity. Bones support weight, muscles resist gravity, skin protects against abrasion. These structures work because the forces involved are familiar and predictable. In the deep ocean, rigidity becomes a weakness. Pressure does not push from one direction. It presses from all sides at once. Anything that resists unevenly is at risk of failure. This is why so many deep-sea bodies are soft, flexible, and compressible. To a surface observer, these bodies can look fragile, even unfinished. They sag when removed from the water. They lose shape. They seem unable to support themselves. But this appearance is misleading. These bodies are not weak. They are tuned precisely to their environment. A flexible body distributes pressure evenly. Instead of resisting force, it yields to it. This prevents localized stress points where damage could occur. Gelatinous tissues, fluid-filled spaces, and reduced skeletal structures all contribute to this effect. The body becomes a system of balance rather than opposition. This flexibility also allows for shape-shifting in subtle ways. Some deep-sea animals can stretch dramatically when feeding, then contract afterward. Others can compress or expand in response to pressure changes without damage. This adaptability reduces the risk associated with movement and feeding in a world where miscalculation can be fatal. From a human perspective, bodies that bend and stretch this way can feel unsettling. We're accustomed to firm outlines and predictable proportions. When a body changes shape easily, it challenges our sense of what is stable. But in the deep ocean, stability is not about holding form. It is about maintaining function. Another defining feature of deep-sea bodies is low density. Neutral buoyancy is a major advantage in a place where constant swimming wastes energy. By matching their density to the surrounding water, animals can hover effortlessly, drifting without sinking or rising. This reduces the need for active movement and conserves calories. Achieving neutral buoyancy often involves replacing dense tissues with lighter ones, or incorporating fluids and fats that balance body weight. In some species, bones are reduced or filled with lipids. In others, muscle mass is minimized. These changes contribute to the soft, sometimes bloated appearance that many deep-sea animals have. Again, this look can be misinterpreted. Bloated suggests excess. In reality, it is optimization. Every gram of tissue must justify its presence. Excess weight costs energy. Lean structures are favoured, even if they look unfamiliar. The absence of rigid armour is another notable trait. On the surface, shells, scales and thick hides offer protection against predators and environmental hazards. In the deep ocean, encounters are rare and abrasion is minimal. Carrying heavy protective structures is costly and often unnecessary. Soft bodies can absorb impacts more effectively than rigid ones when pressure is constant. This does not mean deep-sea animals are defenceless. Their defence lies in avoidance, camouflage and efficiency rather than physical barriers. Being hard to find is often safer than being hard to bite. Temperature also shapes body design. Deep-sea waters are cold, often hovering just above freezing. Cold slows metabolism and reduces the efficiency of muscle contraction. To compensate, many deep-sea animals adopt lifestyles that require minimal movement. Their bodies are built for endurance rather than agility. Muscles are often arranged for sustained, low-effort activity rather than bursts of speed. Movements are slow and deliberate. There is little wasted motion. This economy of movement contributes to the impression that deep-sea creatures are sluggish or lethargic. In reality, they are pacing themselves according to the rules of their environment. Growth patterns reflect this pacing as well. Many deep-sea animals grow slowly, reaching maturity over long periods. Their bodies change gradually, without the rapid growth spurts seen in more resource-rich environments. Longevity is common. A slow-growing body paired with a long lifespan spreads energy costs over time. This long-term strategy also affects repair and regeneration. Damage takes longer to heal in cold, low-energy environments. As a result, bodies are built to avoid damage in the first place. Flexible tissues reduce the risk of tearing. Reduced movement lowers exposure to hazards. Simplicity enhances reliability. When humans encounter images of these bodies, the reaction is often confusion. Where is the muscle? Where is the structure? Where is the familiar framework? The answer is that the framework exists, but it is different. It is internal, distributed, and subtle. The idea of endurance here is not about resisting force, but about accommodating it continuously. This requires a different kind of strength, one that does not announce itself visually. It is strength that shows up over time, in survival rather than display. Another aspect of deep-sea body design is modularity. Many structures serve multiple functions. A body part that aids in buoyancy may also store energy. A tissue that provides flexibility may also assist in sensing movement. This overlap reduces redundancy and conserves resources. To human designers, this kind of efficiency is admirable. To human aesthetics, it can look strange. We tend to separate functions and celebrate specialization. The deep ocean favors integration. This integration extends to internal systems as well. Circulatory, respiratory, and digestive processes are often closely linked. Oxygen consumption is minimized. Waste is processed slowly. Everything is tuned to scarcity. Even reproduction influences body structure. Some deep-sea animals carry reproductive organs that occupy significant portions of their bodies. This may seem disproportionate, but it reflects the importance of seizing rare reproductive opportunities. When encounters are infrequent, readiness matters. In extreme cases, bodies are shaped almost entirely around reproduction and feeding, with little else remaining. This can produce forms that look incomplete or unbalanced to us. But balance is relative. In the deep ocean, the balance point is survival over elegance. It is also worth noting that many deep-sea bodies appear strange because we rarely see them in motion. Photographs freeze them in unnatural positions. Videos capture brief, often stressed behavior under artificial light. The context is missing. In their natural environment, these bodies move with quiet efficiency. They drift, adjust, feed, and rest in ways that make sense within the water column. The bending and stretching that looks alarming on land is normal underwater. The nightmare label arises again from removal. When these bodies are brought to the surface, pressure changes cause expansion, rupture, and collapse. Structures fail because the environment that supported them is gone. What we see is not the animal as it lived, but the animal as it reacts to an impossible situation. This is an important distinction. Many of the most disturbing images of deep-sea creatures show them out of context, damaged by ascent. Judging their design based on these moments is like judging a bird by how it swims. When considered on their own terms, these bodies reveal a quiet logic. They are not built to impress or intimidate. They are built to endure conditions that would destroy most life. They represent a different solution to existence, one that prioritizes persistence over performance. As this understanding deepens, the idea of nightmare loses some of its force. What once seemed monstrous begins to feel methodical. The deep ocean becomes less a place of horror and more a place of discipline. This does not make it welcoming. The conditions remain harsh. But the harshness is consistent. There are no sudden changes, no surprises of climate or light. The rules are strict but stable. This stability allows bodies to specialize deeply. Over time, evolution pushes designs toward extremes because there is little incentive to moderate. If bending works, bend more. If stretching allows survival, stretch further. If reducing structure saves energy, reduce it. The result is a collection of forms that look exaggerated because they are. They are expressions of adaptation pushed far from the human norm. Understanding bodies built to bend, stretch and endure prepares the ground for another shift in perspective. Once movement slows and structures soften, time itself begins to feel different. Life does not rush. Growth, aging and activity unfold at a pace that challenges our expectations. The deep ocean does not just reshape bodies, it reshapes lives. And to understand why these creatures feel so alien, it helps to look not only at how they are built, but at how long they live, how slowly they move, and how time stretches in a world where urgency is rarely rewarded. From here, attention naturally turns toward the rhythm of existence itself in the deep, and how survival unfolds not in moments, but in extended spans where patience becomes the most powerful adaptation of all. Time behaves differently in the deep ocean, not because physics changes in any dramatic way, but because life does. The absence of light, the cold, the pressure, and the scarcity of food all conspire to stretch biological time until it barely resembles the rhythms we are familiar with. In this environment, speed is rarely rewarded. Urgency is often dangerous. What thrives instead is patience, persistence, and an almost unimaginable slowness. When we think of survival, we tend to imagine action, chasing, fleeing, building, competing. On the surface, life often feels busy. Animals eat frequently, grow quickly, reproduce early, and die young. Ecosystems pulse with movement. Seasons drive cycles of abundance and scarcity. Time feels full. The deep ocean operates under a different tempo. Down there, nothing happens quickly unless it absolutely has to. Energy arrives slowly. Growth unfolds gradually. Lives extend not because conditions are gentle, but because everything else would cost too much. Cold is one of the primary reasons for this slowness. Deep-sea temperatures remain low and stable, often hovering just above freezing. Cold slows chemical reactions. Enzymes work more slowly, muscles contract with less speed and force, metabolism drops. Every process that depends on chemistry, which is to say nearly all of them, takes longer. This reduction in metabolic rate has cascading effects. Animals burn fewer calories per unit of time. They need less food to survive day to day, but it also means that recovery takes longer. Growth takes longer. Repair takes longer. Everything becomes an exercise in long-term planning rather than short-term gain. Food scarcity reinforces this pace. When meals are unpredictable, it makes little sense to grow quickly or reproduce early. Rapid growth requires consistent nutrition. Early reproduction requires surplus energy. In the deep oceans, surplus is rare. Evolution favours strategies that spread energy use over long spans rather than concentrating it into brief bursts. As a result, many deep-sea animals grow slowly and live long lives. Some species reach sexual maturity only after decades. Others continue growing throughout their lives, never quite stopping. Longevity becomes a side effect of efficiency. When you burn energy slowly, you age slowly. This challenges our intuitive sense of time. We're accustomed to thinking of long life as a reward for comfort or abundance. In the deep ocean, long life emerges from restraint. It is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Movement reflects this philosophy. Deep-sea animals rarely dart or sprint. Sudden movements are expensive. They require muscle contractions that consume valuable energy. Instead, motion is minimal and deliberate. A fin flick here, a body adjustment there, long periods of stillness punctuated by brief, purposeful action. To a human observer, this can look like lethargy, but it is closer to efficiency. Stillness is not inactivity, it is a strategy. when drifting consumes no energy, and when prey may come to you, waiting makes sense. Even predators adopt this pace. They do not patrol territories constantly. They do not chase relentlessly. They position themselves and wait. When an opportunity arises, they act decisively, then return to stillness. The ratio of waiting to acting is heavily skewed toward patience. This rhythm extends to reproduction as well. In many deep-sea species, reproductive events are infrequent. Gametes may be released only under specific conditions. Mating opportunities may be rare. Instead of repeated attempts, animals invest heavily in the few chances they get. This can involve producing large, energy-rich eggs that develop slowly. It can involve prolonged gestation. It can involve strategies that ensure success when encounters happen, even if those encounters are separated by years. From the outside, this can look inefficient. Why not reproduce more often? Why not increase the odds? The answer is cost. Each reproductive effort carries risk. In an environment where energy is precious, failed attempts are expensive. Slow life also means slow change. Deep-sea environments are remarkably stable compared to the surface. Temperatures do not fluctuate much. Light conditions remain constant. Pressure never changes. This stability reduces the need for rapid adaptation. Once a successful design emerges, it can persist for millions of years with little modification. This persistence gives the deep ocean a sense of timelessness. Some species living today resemble ancient forms that disappeared elsewhere long ago. They are not frozen in time. They are simply living in conditions that do not demand constant reinvention. Human perception struggles with this scale. We are used to environments that change quickly, weather shifts daily. Seasons alter landscapes yearly. Technologies evolve over decades. In the deep ocean, a century can pass with little visible change. This slow pace affects behaviour in subtle ways. Deep-sea animals often show little curiosity. Investigating unknown objects costs energy. Risk assessment favours avoidance unless there is a clear benefit. When submersibles arrive, many creatures drift away slowly or remain still, conserving energy rather than reacting dramatically. To us, this calm can feel eerie. We expect flight or aggression. The absence of either feels unnatural, but it is consistent with a life strategy built around minimizing expenditure. The slowest lives on Earth also experience time differently at a physiological level. Internal clocks are less tied to daily cycles. Without sunrise and sunset, circadian rhythms weaken or disappear. Some species maintain internal timing linked to food availability or tides, but many operate without obvious schedules. Activity becomes opportunistic rather than routine. Feeding happens when food arrives. Reproduction happens when encounters occur. Rest happens whenever possible. The day has no meaning. The year has little relevance. This lack of temporal structure can feel disorienting to humans, whose lives are governed by clocks. We measure progress in hours, days, and years. In the deep ocean, progress is measured in survival. Even aging becomes less obvious. Many deep-sea animals show few outward signs of age. Growth rings, wrinkles, and other markers we associate with aging may be absent or subtle. Age is not advertised. It accumulates quietly. This quiet accumulation contributes to the unsettling quality of deep-sea life. We are uncomfortable with beings that do not show time passing in familiar ways. A creature that looks the same after decades challenges our sense of normalcy. There is also a psychological projection at work. Slowness is often associated with decline or weakness in human culture. We celebrate speed, productivity, and efficiency. In the deep ocean, slowness is strength. It is the optimal response to constraint. When humans label deep-sea creatures as nightmarish, part of that reaction stems from this mismatch. These animals do not hurry. They do not react dramatically. They do not behave in ways that align with our narratives of survival. Their calm persistence feels alien, but this persistence is precisely why they exist. The deep ocean does not forgive excess. It rewards balance over ambition. slow lives also mean slow death. When an organism dies in the deep, its body does not vanish quickly. Decomposition proceeds gradually. Scavengers arrive slowly. A large carcass can support a localized ecosystem for years. Time stretches even in death. This extended presence influences how life is distributed. Organisms that specialize in exploiting these rare events may wait long periods for them. Their life strategies revolve around patience and readiness. From this perspective, the deep ocean becomes a place where urgency has been almost entirely removed. There is no rush to arrive anywhere. There is no deadline. There is only continuation. This does not mean the deep is peaceful. It is unforgiving. Mistakes are costly. Recovery is slow. But the punishment for error is not sudden chaos. It is gradual decline. Understanding this temporal framework helps explain why deep-sea creatures look the way they do. Bodies that bend and stretch support long lives. Faces optimized for rare encounters align with long waiting periods. Teeth and jaws built for infrequent feeding match extended fasting. Everything fits together once time is considered as part of the environment rather than a neutral backdrop. The slowest lives on Earth are not slow because they are inefficient. They are slow because they are precise. They have eliminated urgency wherever possible. They have tuned their existence to conditions that change little and offer few opportunities. This precision is difficult to appreciate from the surface, where speed often feels synonymous with success. In the deep ocean, success is measured in survival over vast spans. As this idea settles, the deep stops feeling chaotic or grotesque. It starts to feel disciplined. Every adaptation points toward conservation. Every behavior reflects restraint. This restraint also shapes how these creatures interact with us. They do not react dramatically to our presence. They do not charge or flee with urgency. They drift, observe briefly if at all, and continue existing as they always have. The nightmare imagery fades further when seen through this lens. What remains is a quiet, austere form of life, operating at a pace that feels almost philosophical. And yet, this slowness is not universal. Within this measured world, there are moments of sudden change, brief flashes of activity that break the stillness. These moments stand out precisely because everything else is so restrained. Understanding the slow rhythm of deep-sea life sets the stage for exploring how humans interpret these creatures through our own fears and expectations. When we encounter something that lives so differently, our instincts struggle to keep up. That struggle reveals as much about us as it does about the ocean. When humans describe deep-sea creatures as nightmares, they are rarely talking about biology. They are talking about themselves, about instinct, expectation, and the quiet panic that arises when familiar rules no longer apply. The deep ocean does not manufacture fear. It reveals it. Our reactions to these animals are shaped long before we ever see them. Human perception evolved in environments where visibility mattered, where danger often announced itself through movement, sound, or recognizable shapes. We learned to scan faces, read expressions, identify intent. A pair of eyes meeting ours could signal threat or safety. A mouth opening wide could mean attack. These interpretations are fast, automatic, and deeply ingrained. They work well on land and in shallow water. In the deep ocean, they misfire. When we encounter a creature whose face does not conform to these expectations, our brains struggle to categorize it. There is a brief moment where recognition fails. That gap, however small, is uncomfortable. The mind dislikes uncertainty, especially when the unknown resembles something alive. To resolve that discomfort quickly, we reach for labels. Strange becomes threatening. Unfamiliar becomes monstrous. The word nightmare appears, not because the creature intends harm, but because our instincts demand resolution. This reaction happens before logic has time to intervene. Even when we understand intellectually that a deep-sea animal is unlikely to pose any danger, the emotional response can persist. This is not a flaw in reasoning. It is a feature of human perception. Fear evolved to be faster than understanding. There is also the matter of context. Most people encounter deep-sea creatures through photographs or videos taken under extreme conditions. Artificial lights flood a space that has never known illumination. Shadows sharpen. Textures stand out harshly. Colours distort. The animal is often stressed, injured, or dying due to pressure changes. What we see is not a natural moment. It is disruption. Imagine judging a nocturnal animal based on a single photograph taken with a blinding flash in the middle of the night. The image would feel aggressive, unnatural, even grotesque. That is essentially what we do with deep-sea life, only on a much larger scale. Scale itself adds another layer of distortion. Without familiar reference points, our brains misjudge size. A creature that fits comfortably in a human hand can look enormous when photographed close up. A mouth, designed to capture small drifting prey, appears cavernous when framed tightly. The absence of environmental cues forces the brain to guess, and those guesses tend to skew toward danger. There is also a cultural dimension to how we interpret these forms. For centuries, the ocean has been a symbol of the unknown in human stories. It has housed monsters, gods, and omens. Sailors spoke of things that dragged ships under or rose from the depths at night. These stories did not emerge from scientific observation, but from fear of what could not be seen. Modern technology has replaced folklore with footage, but the emotional legacy remains. When we see something emerge from darkness, ancient associations resurface. The deep ocean still occupies the role of the unseen world, and its inhabitants inherit that symbolism whether they deserve it or not. Human faces are central to empathy. We bond through expressions, eye contact, and subtle cues. When a creature lacks these cues, or presents them in distorted ways, empathy becomes harder. We struggle to assign intention. Without intention, we default to caution. Without reassurance, caution slides easily into fear. This is why faces matter so much in the nightmare narrative. A deep-sea creature's body might be strange, but it is the face that unsettles. Eyes that do not focus, mouths that do not close neatly, features that do not align symmetrically. These elements interfere with our social instincts. We do not know how to read them, so we assume the worst. There is a psychological phenomenon known as the uncanny valley, where things that are almost familiar but not quite provoke discomfort. Deep-sea creatures often fall into this category. They're clearly animals, but they do not fit the templates our minds rely on. The closer they seem to human features, while still deviating from them, the stronger the reaction can be. Yet this discomfort is not universal. When scientists who study deep-sea life look at these animals, their reactions differ. Familiarity changes perception. Understanding replaces instinctive fear with curiosity. The same features that trigger dread in casual observers become clues to survival strategies, evolutionary history, and environmental pressures. This shift highlights an important truth. Fear often fills the space where knowledge is absent. The less context we have, the more our minds rely on instinct. When context increases, fear often recedes. Another factor shaping human reactions is motion, or the lack of it. Deep-sea animals often move slowly or remain still for long periods. To human eyes, this can feel unnatural. We associate stillness with death or ambush. An animal that does not move when approached feels unpredictable. Our instincts prepare for sudden action. In reality, this stillness is energy conservation, not aggression. But our nervous systems do not make that distinction automatically. Stillness becomes a warning sign, not a strategy. There is also the issue of environment mismatch. Humans are air breathers adapted to gravity, solid ground, and visual dominance. The deep ocean removes all of that. Buoyancy replaces footing. Pressure replaces air. Darkness replaces orientation. When we imagine ourselves in that environment, we imagine vulnerability. The creatures that thrive there become symbols of our imagined helplessness. This projection is powerful. We see their adaptations not as solutions, but as evidence of a hostile world. Their teeth become threats, their eyes become surveillance, their bodies become distortions. We are not seeing them as they are. We are seeing them as representations of a place where we would not survive. Even language reinforces this bias. Words like abyss, void, and depths carry emotional weight. They imply emptiness, danger, and loss. When creatures are described as coming from these places, the language primes fear before the image appears. Media amplification plays a role as well. Images of deep-sea animals are often framed sensationally. Headlines emphasize horror, weirdness, or shock. Lighting is dramatic. Music is tense. The narrative invites fear. This framing becomes the lens through which many people first encounter these animals. Once that association is formed, it is hard to undo. Each new image reinforces the same reaction. The nightmare label sticks, even as evidence accumulates that these creatures are neither malicious nor monstrous. There is also a deeper discomfort at play. Deep-sea creatures challenge human exceptionalism. They remind us that life does not revolve around us, our preferences, or our definitions of beauty. They thrive without sunlight, without speed, without social complexity as we understand it. They exist in ways that do not acknowledge us at all. This indifference can feel threatening. Humans are used to environments responding to our presence. Animals flee, fight, or engage. Deep-sea life often does none of these. It simply continues. That lack of acknowledgement unsettles us more than hostility would. The nightmare narrative is, in part, a response to being irrelevant. There is also the matter of control. On the surface, humans dominate most environments. We build, alter, and regulate. The deep ocean resists this. It is expensive to reach, difficult to explore, and dangerous to occupy. Its inhabitants exist largely beyond our influence. When we see creatures adapted to conditions we cannot control, the imbalance becomes apparent. Fear often arises where control ends. Yet when we step back and examine these reactions, something interesting happens. The fear begins to soften, not disappear entirely, but change character. It becomes less about threat and more about difference, less about danger and more about unfamiliarity. This shift does not require affection or comfort. It requires recognition. Recognition that our perception is not neutral, that our instincts are not universal truths, that labeling something a nightmare does not make it one. Deep-sea creatures do not experience themselves as terrifying. They do not know they are strange. They are not aware of human reactions. They are simply alive, shaped by an environment that rewards different solutions. When humans call them nightmares, we are really naming the limits of our own perception. We are confronting a version of life that refuses to fit into our frameworks. This confrontation can be unsettling, but it can also be clarifying. It forces us to acknowledge that beauty, normalcy, and even fear are context-dependent. What feels wrong to us may be perfectly right elsewhere. As understanding deepens, something else becomes possible, or replaces dread. Not the awe of spectacle, but the quieter awe of adaptation. The recognition that life can persist under conditions that feel utterly incompatible with our own existence. This does not require romanticizing the deep ocean or its inhabitants. It remains harsh, it remains indifferent, but it becomes legible, and once something becomes legible, it stops being a nightmare. The deep ocean does not ask us to like it. It does not ask us to feel comfortable. It simply exists, operating according to rules that have nothing to do with human perception. The creatures within it are expressions of those rules, not violations of them. Understanding this prepares the way for an even deeper realization. These animals are not just strange because of where they live. They are strange because they evolved largely without witnesses, without being seen, judged, or selected by anything resembling human preference. They are products of an environment that has been shaping life quietly for millions of years, far from attention, far from expectation. To understand them fully means letting go of the idea that life should look a certain way. And that realization opens the door to the next layer of the story, where evolution unfolds without spectators, and where form follows necessity with no concern for how it will be perceived. For most of Earth's history, evolution happened unseen. Not unseen in a poetic sense, but literally without observers. Long before eyes capable of judgment existed, life was already adapting, experimenting, discarding forms that didn't work and refining those that did. Nowhere is this more true than in the deep ocean, where evolution has unfolded in near total isolation from surface life, from sunlight, and from anything resembling an audience. When evolution proceeds without witnesses, it follows only one standard: survival. There is no pressure to appear impressive, no advantage in being recognizable, no penalty for being unsettling. Traits persist not because they look right, but because they work quietly and consistently across spans of time that are difficult for the human mind to grasp. The deep ocean has been stable for hundreds of millions of years. While continents shifted, climates changed, ice ages came and went, the abyss remained largely the same: cold, dark, pressurized, and sparse. This stability created an evolutionary environment very different from the surface, where rapid change often rewards flexibility and speed. In the deep, consistency rewards specialization. This is why deep-sea life often feels disconnected from the rest of the living world. Many lineages branched off long ago and continued evolving along paths that surface organisms never followed. They were not responding to the same predators, the same light cycles, or the same food webs. Their evolutionary pressures were internal to the deep, shaped by scarcity, distance, and time. Without witnesses, there is no selection for familiarity. On the surface, animals often evolve features that are legible to others. Warning colours signal danger. Courtship displays communicate fitness. Facial cues convey intent. These traits evolve because they influence interactions. In the deep ocean, interactions are rare and brief. There is little value in being legible. As a result, communication becomes minimal. Signals are stripped down to essentials. If something does not directly increase the likelihood of survival or reproduction, it fades away. This pruning process leads to forms that feel stark, even harsh, to human observers. But harshness is not the goal. Efficiency is. Evolution without witnesses also means mistakes persist differently. On the surface, a maladaptive trait may be quickly eliminated due to frequent interactions and intense competition. In the deep ocean, where populations are sparse and encounters infrequent, a trait can persist for long periods before being tested. This can lead to unusual combinations of features that might not survive elsewhere. Over time, however, the deep is unforgiving in its own way. A trait that consistently wastes energy or increases risk will eventually disappear. The difference is pace. The process unfolds slowly, with fewer corrections, but each correction is decisive. This slow refinement produces organisms that look highly specialized, sometimes to the point of seeming fragile or extreme. In reality, they are the opposite. They are survivors of a long filtering process that left little room for inefficiency. Another consequence of evolution without witnesses is the absence of convergence towards surface norms. On land, unrelated species often evolve similar forms because they face similar challenges. Wings appear in birds, bats, and insects. Streamlined bodies appear in fish, dolphins, and sharks. These similarities create a sense of order and predictability. In the deep ocean, convergence still occurs, but along different axes. Large mouths appear repeatedly. Reduced skeletons recur. Bioluminescence evolves independently many times. But because these solutions are unfamiliar to us, they feel chaotic rather than orderly. The pattern is there. It simply does not align with our expectations. Human discomfort often arises from this misalignment. We are accustomed to seeing evolution as a process that produces recognizable themes. The deep ocean produces themes too, but they are written in a different language. The absence of witnesses also means there's no feedback loop based on perception. On the surface, being seen can influence survival. Predators learn to recognize prey. Prey learn to recognize predators. Visual mimicry evolves. In the deep, being seen is rare. When it happens, it is often too late for learning to matter. This reduces the importance of deception through appearance. Mimicry still exists, but it's often functional rather than visual. Chemical mimicry, behavioral timing, light signals. These forms of deception do not rely on being watched consistently. They rely on physics and chemistry. Without witnesses, evolution also becomes less constrained by narrative. On the surface, we often tell evolutionary stories that feel linear. A trait emerges, spreads, improves. In the deep ocean, evolution is more fragmented. Isolated populations adapt independently. Solutions arise, persist, and sometimes disappear without ever interacting with others. This fragmentation contributes to the diversity of deep-sea forms. It also makes them harder to categorize. They do not fit neatly into familiar groups. Their relationships are complex, branching, and often poorly understood. The lack of witnesses extends beyond humans. Even other animals rarely observe deep-sea life. Encounters are fleeting. There is little opportunity for social learning or behavioral imitation. Each organism operates largely on instinct shaped by genetics rather than experience. This isolation reinforces simplicity. Complex behaviors that require learning or coordination are risky. Simpler, hardwired strategies are more reliable. This is why many deep-sea animals exhibit behaviors that seem repetitive or limited. They are not improvising. They are executing programs refined over immense spans of time. From a human perspective, this can feel unsettling. We value learning, adaptability, and flexibility. We celebrate intelligence and problem-solving. Deep-sea life prioritizes reliability. When conditions are extreme and resources scarce, the margin for experimentation shrinks. This does not mean deep-sea animals are unintelligent. It means intelligence takes different forms. Sensory processing may be highly refined, energy management may be precise. But curiosity, as we understand it, offers little advantage. Evolution without witnesses also means that deep-sea life does not evolve in response to being observed. On the surface, human presence alters ecosystems rapidly. Animals change behavior. Species decline or adapt. In the deep, human influence has historically been minimal. Until recently, these environments evolved almost entirely without interference. This makes deep-sea creatures feel untouched, not in a romantic sense, but in a literal one. They are not adapted to us. They do not recognize us. Their forms were finalized long before we ever looked down. When humans finally did look, the shock was mutual only in one direction. We were startled. They were not. This one-sided encounter amplifies the sense of otherness. We expect some acknowledgement, some reaction. When it does not come, the mind interprets indifference as menace. But indifference is simply the default state of evolution without witnesses. Life does not anticipate observation. It does not prepare for interpretation. It exists. Another important consequence of unseen evolution is that many deep-sea adaptations push boundaries that would be unstable in more dynamic environments. Extremely slow growth, highly specialized diets, reproductive strategies that depend on rare encounters. These approaches work because conditions are stable. On the surface, they would fail. This stability allows evolution to explore extremes. It can afford to produce organisms that would not survive rapid change. The deep ocean becomes a repository of solutions that only make sense under constant pressure and darkness. This repository feels alien because it is. It represents a branch of life that diverged early and continued developing along its own logic. Human reactions to it often reflect surprise that such logic exists at all. The nightmare framing emerges again here. We tend to fear what we do not recognize and cannot predict. Deep-sea creatures evolved without being predictable to us. They were never selected to align with our mental models. When we describe them as nightmarish, we are reacting to that misalignment. Our minds search for familiar reference points and fail to find them. The result is discomfort. But if we pause and consider what it means for evolution to occur without witnesses, the discomfort begins to transform. These creatures are not errors. They are outcomes of a process that did not include us. This realization can feel humbling. It reminds us that human perception is not a universal standard, that life does not need to look a certain way to be valid, that beauty and normalcy are local concepts, not cosmic ones. The deep ocean shows us what happens when evolution is allowed to proceed with minimal interference. No agriculture, no domestication, no aesthetic selection. Just physics, chemistry, and time. Time, especially, plays a crucial role. Millions of years pass quietly. Small advantages accumulate. Traits that barely improve survival persist and spread. Over long spans, these small differences produce dramatic results. To human eyes, the final forms look extreme. To evolution, they are incremental. Understanding this helps dissolve the idea that deep-sea creatures are aberrations. They are not deviations from a norm. They are expressions of a different norm, one shaped by conditions that rarely change and rarely forgive. As this perspective settles, the deep ocean begins to feel less like a place of horror and more like a place of honesty. Nothing there pretends to be anything else. There is no performance, no disguise meant for an audience. This honesty can be unsettling because it strips away comforting illusions. It confronts us with life that exists entirely on its own terms. And yet there is something quietly reassuring about this as well. It suggests that life is not fragile in the way we often imagine. It can persist under conditions that feel utterly incompatible with our own existence. Evolution without witnesses is not chaotic. It is disciplined. It is patient. It is indifferent to perception. Recognizing this shifts how we view the deep ocean and its inhabitants. They are not nightmares. They are reminders. Reminders that life does not need approval, that it does not need to be seen to be real. As we move forward, this realization opens another door. Many of the forms we see in the deep are not recent innovations. They echo designs that emerged long ago, preserved by stability and isolation. These ancient patterns connect the deep ocean to Earth's distant past, revealing a continuity that stretches far beyond human history. Understanding that connection adds yet another layer to why these creatures feel so strange, and why their strangeness carries a sense of deep time rather than sudden shock. The deep ocean is not just hidden in space, it is hidden in time. The deep ocean does not feel old in the way ruins feel old. There are no crumbling edges, no visible decay, no obvious markers of age. Instead, it feels suspended. Removed from the rapid cycles that define life on the surface. In this suspended state, ancient designs persist not because they are relics, but because the world around them never demanded their replacement. When people hear that some deep-sea creatures resemble forms that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, the assumption is often that these animals are primitive, leftovers from an earlier era. This framing is misleading. Ancient does not mean outdated. In the deep ocean, ancient often means successful. The conditions that dominate the abyss today are remarkably similar to those that existed long before humans appeared. Darkness, cold, pressure, and scarcity have remained largely unchanged over immense spans of time. While continents drifted and climates oscillated above, the deep ocean continued quietly, insulated from many of the forces that drive rapid evolutionary change. This stability allows designs to persist. When an organism is well matched to its environment, there is little incentive for drastic change. Evolution does not pursue novelty for its own sake, it responds to pressure. In the deep ocean, the pressures have been consistent enough that many solutions arrived early and stayed. This is why some deep-sea animals resemble fossils brought to life. Their body plans echo ancient lineages that once dominated shallow seas before changing conditions reshaped surface ecosystems. As light-filled environments became more competitive and variable, those forms vanished from the surface. In the deep, where conditions remained familiar, they endured. To human observers, these creatures can feel out of place, as if they belong to a different world. In a sense, they do. They belong to a version of Earth that still exists beneath the surface, operating under rules that predate our species by hundreds of millions of years. The idea of a timeless world is difficult to grasp because human experience is so tightly bound to change. Seasons shift, landscapes erode, technology evolves. We measure progress through transformation. In the deep ocean, progress looks different. It looks like persistence. Persistence does not mean stagnation. Deep-sea life continues to evolve, but the changes are often subtle. Adjustments refine existing structures rather than replacing them entirely. A jaw becomes slightly more flexible. A sensory organ becomes slightly more sensitive. A metabolic process becomes slightly more efficient. Over millions of years, these small adjustments accumulate. But because the underlying framework remains stable, the overall form stays recognizable. To us, this reads as timelessness. There is something unsettling about this continuity. We are accustomed to seeing age expressed through wear and replacement. When something endures without visible aging, it challenges our assumptions about time. Deep-sea creatures seem disconnected from history, even though they are deeply embedded in it. This disconnection contributes to their alien quality. They do not reflect the recent evolutionary pressures that shaped familiar animals. They reflect ancient pressures that are still active below. Many of the features we associate with deep-sea nightmares, oversized mouths, reduced skeletons, bioluminescent organs, slow metabolisms, appeared early in Earth's history. These were not late-stage exaggerations. They were early experiments that proved effective and never lost their relevance. From this perspective, the deep ocean functions as a kind of archive. Not a museum where things are frozen, but a living record where successful designs continue to operate. The creatures living there are not snapshots of the past. They are ongoing expressions of it. This continuity also explains why deep-sea life often resists classification. Our taxonomic systems are built around surface organisms shaped by relatively recent evolutionary relationships. Deep-sea lineages often diverged early and followed paths that surface life did not. Their relationships are complex and sometimes obscure. When scientists encounter new deep-sea species, they are often surprised by how little they resemble known groups. This is not because they are entirely unrelated, but because their evolutionary journeys diverged so long ago that superficial similarities were lost. To the human eye, this loss of similarity reads as strangeness, but it is simply distance, measured not in space, but in time. Ancient designs also persist because the deep ocean shields life from many extinction pressures. Surface ecosystems are vulnerable to rapid climate shifts, habitat loss, and mass extinctions triggered by external events. The deep ocean, while not immune, is buffered. Changes arrive slowly, impacts are dampened. This buffering allows lineages to survive events that wipe out surface relatives. After mass extinctions, the deep ocean often acts as a refuge. Life continues there while surface ecosystems rebuild. When conditions stabilize, some deep-sea lineages may expand upward again, carrying ancient traits into new contexts. This ebb and flow ties the deep ocean to the broader history of life on Earth. It is not separate, it is foundational. Understanding this foundation reframes how we see deep-sea creatures. Their unusual forms are not random or excessive. They are conserved solutions tested repeatedly over geological time. They look strange because they were never revised to suit modern human sensibilities. Human aesthetics evolved recently, shaped by social interaction, daylight, and familiarity. Deep-sea aesthetics, if such a thing exists, evolved under conditions that never included us. This mismatch creates the impression of nightmare. We are seeing designs that predate our instincts. Our brains are trying to interpret signals meant for a world that no longer exists on the surface. There is also a subtle discomfort in realizing that some of these designs may outlast us. Human civilizations are young and fragile by geological standards. Deep-sea lineages have persisted through multiple mass extinctions. They are likely to persist through more. This longevity challenges our sense of importance. We tend to see ourselves as central to Earth's story. The deep ocean quietly reminds us that life's story is much larger and much older. The timelessness of the deep is not static. It is dynamic equilibrium. Processes continue, but they do so within narrow bounds. Change happens, but slowly enough that it feels almost imperceptible. For deep-sea organisms, this means living in a world where yesterday, today and tomorrow are nearly indistinguishable. There is no seasonal urgency, no dramatic shifts in availability. Life unfolds at a pace where memory and anticipation matter less than consistency. This temporal flattening influences behavior and physiology. There is little need for rapid learning or adaptation. Hardwired strategies dominate. Instincts shaped long ago continue to function. To humans, this can feel eerie. We associate intelligence with flexibility and learning. The deep ocean demonstrates another path: reliability over innovation, persistence over novelty. Ancient designs also explain why some deep-sea creatures feel unfinished to us. They lack the refinements we associate with modern animals because refinement, in the sense we mean it, was unnecessary. Their design solved the problem early and well. In this context, calling them nightmares becomes almost ironic. Nightmares are transient, fleeting experiences that disrupt sleep and vanish upon waking. Deep-sea creatures are anything but fleeting. They are enduring. They do not exist to scare. They exist because they work. As we take in this perspective, the deep ocean begins to feel less chaotic and more composed. Its inhabitants are not assembled randomly. They are curated by time itself. Time in the deep does not rush. It does not demand constant reinvention. It allows solutions to settle and remain. This allowance creates a sense of inevitability. These forms feel like they could only exist here and only look this way. They are not extreme for the sake of extremity. They are precise. This precision becomes clearer when we consider how these ancient designs interact with human fear. Fear often arises when something feels out of place or unpredictable. Ancient designs feel out of place because they belong to a different temporal context. They feel unpredictable because we lack familiarity with that context. But unpredictability fades with understanding. Once we recognize that these creatures are products of stability rather than chaos, the fear shifts. What remains is respect. Not admiration in a sentimental sense, but acknowledgement. These organisms represent solutions that have endured longer than most human ideas, technologies, or institutions. They remind us that survival does not always favour the new. Sometimes it favours the sufficient. As this idea settles, another realization follows. If the deep ocean preserves ancient designs, it also preserves ancient challenges. The forces shaping life there are not softened by time. They remain constant. This means that fear itself, the kind we feel when encountering deep-sea creatures, may also be ancient. It may be rooted in instinct shaped when darkness and unknown depths posed real threats to early humans. Understanding that connection brings the story back toward us, toward how fear, survival and perception intersect. The deep ocean does not create nightmares, it activates old ones. And in doing so, it invites us to examine not just the creatures we find there, but the assumptions we bring with us when we look into the dark. Fear is not an accident. It is not a flaw in human thinking, nor is it a weakness to be overcome. Fear is one of the oldest survival tools our species possesses, refined long before language, logic, or science. It evolved to act quickly, to fill gaps in knowledge, to protect us when understanding was incomplete. The deep ocean, more than almost any other environment on Earth, exposes how fear works, why it exists, and where it begins to mislead us. When humans peer into the deep, We're not just looking at unfamiliar animals. We're confronting an environment that mirrors many of the conditions our ancestors were wired to fear. Darkness without edges, depth without reference, movement without warning. These conditions trigger responses that are ancient, automatic, and powerful. The creatures that live there inherit those reactions simply by existing within that context. Fear thrives on uncertainty. On land, many dangers are visible. A predator can be seen, heard, smelled. Escape routes can be identified. The deep ocean removes these assurances. Visibility collapses. Sound behaves strangely. Space becomes three-dimensional and continuous. There is no ground, no sky, no clear boundary between safe and unsafe. For a human nervous system, this is an ideal breeding ground for fear. What deep-sea creatures reveal is not that fear is irrational, but that it is situational. Our instincts evolve to respond to environments where immediate action increases survival. In the deep ocean, those instincts have nothing to act on. There is no familiar pattern to interpret. The mind fills the silence with threat. This is why deep-sea imagery feels different from other forms of wildlife photography. A lion on the savannah can be contextualized. We understand its behavior. We know when it is hunting and when it is resting. A deep-sea fish, floating in darkness, offers no such clarity. Its stillness could mean anything. Its movement, when it happens, feels abrupt. Fear fills the interpretive gap. The deep also reveals how fear prioritizes certain visual cues. Large eyes suggest awareness. Teeth suggest danger. Unusual proportions suggest abnormality. These cues are not inherently meaningful, but they are deeply ingrained in human pattern recognition. When they appear together in unfamiliar combinations, fear intensifies. Yet when we examine these cues in context, their meaning changes. Teeth are not signals of aggression, but tools for scarcity. Large eyes are not signs of surveillance, but adaptations to darkness. Unusual proportions are not deformities, but solutions. Fear does not evaluate context. It reacts to shapes, contrasts, and movement. Understanding requires time. The deep ocean forces us to confront the difference between the two. This confrontation is uncomfortable because it exposes the limits of intuition. We like to believe that our instincts are reliable guides. In familiar environments, they often are. In unfamiliar ones, they can be misleading. The deep ocean makes this mismatch visible. Fear also reflects vulnerability. Humans are not adapted to the deep. We cannot breathe there. We cannot withstand the pressure. We cannot navigate without technology. When we look at creatures that thrive under these conditions, part of our reaction is an acknowledgement of our own fragility. This acknowledgement is rarely conscious. It manifests as discomfort, unease, or fascination tinged with dread. The deep ocean becomes a symbol of a world where we are not dominant, where our usual advantages disappear. Fear emerges as a response to loss of control. Survival in the deep looks nothing like survival on the surface. It is not about strength or speed. It is about efficiency, patience, and endurance. These traits do not align with human narratives of heroism or struggle. They feel passive. They feel alien, yet they are no less valid. In fact, they are often more effective. The deep ocean reveals that survival is not a single strategy, but a spectrum of responses shaped by environment. Human fear tends to flatten this spectrum. It reduces complex adaptations into simple categories: safe or dangerous, familiar or monstrous. The deep ocean resists this reduction. Its inhabitants do not fit neatly into our categories. They expose how much of our fear is based on expectation rather than evidence. There is also an emotional contradiction at play. Humans are drawn to the deep precisely because it scares us. Fear and curiosity are closely linked. Both are responses to the unknown. The same darkness that triggers anxiety also invites exploration. The deep ocean sits at this intersection, pulling us in while reminding us of our limits. This push and pull has shaped human behaviour for centuries. We tell stories about the sea. We imagine creatures lurking below. We speculate about what remains unseen. These narratives are not just entertainment. They are ways of processing uncertainty. Deep-sea creatures become characters in these stories, not because they are dangerous, but because they are unknown. Fear fills the space where familiarity is absent. When we study these animals scientifically, fear recedes. Not because the environment becomes less extreme, but because understanding replaces projection. The same creature that looked terrifying becomes a case study in adaptation. Teeth become feeding mechanisms, eyes become sensory trade-offs, bodies become engineering solutions. This shift does not eliminate fear entirely. The deep remains inhospitable. But it transforms fear from an emotional reaction into a cognitive awareness. We move from panic to respect. The deep ocean also reveals that fear itself can be adaptive. Our caution around unknown depths likely protected our ancestors from real dangers. Fear discouraged reckless exploration. It preserved life. The problem arises when fear persists beyond its usefulness, when it blocks understanding rather than prompting it. Deep-sea life challenges us to recalibrate fear, not to abandon it, but to contextualize it, to recognize when it is signaling real risk and when it is responding to unfamiliarity. This recalibration has broader implications. The way we react to deep-sea creatures mirrors how we react to many unknowns. New environments, new ideas, new forms of life. Fear often appears first, followed by interpretation. The deep ocean makes this sequence visible because it removes familiar anchors. There is nothing to compare against, no baseline. Our reactions are exposed in their raw form. Survival in the deep also reveals something about fear's counterpart, resilience. The creatures that live there are not fearful in the way we are. They do not anticipate danger in abstract terms. They respond to immediate conditions. Their survival strategies are built into their bodies and behaviours, not mediated by anxiety. This contrast highlights how much of human fear is cognitive rather than physical. We imagine threats. We project futures. We rehearse scenarios. Deep-sea organisms do none of this. They exist moment to moment within narrow parameters. This does not make them superior. It makes them different. Their environment does not reward imagination. It rewards reliability. When humans label deep-sea creatures as nightmares, we are often reacting to this difference. We are encountering life that does not share our psychological framework. It does not signal comfort or threat in familiar ways. It does not acknowledge us. This lack of acknowledgement can feel unsettling. We are social animals. We expect feedback. The deep ocean offers none. It does not respond to our fear. It does not adjust to our presence. It remains indifferent. Indifference is often more disturbing than hostility. Hostility can be negotiated with. Indifference cannot. The deep ocean's indifference reveals another truth about fear. Fear often arises when we are not the centre of the system, when our presence does not matter, when outcomes are unaffected by our reactions. In the deep, survival does not hinge on human perception. Life continues regardless of whether we watch or not. This challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that we matter everywhere we go. Confronting this can be uncomfortable, but it can also be clarifying. It reminds us that fear is not always a signal of danger. Sometimes it is a signal of humility. Survival, viewed through the lens of the deep, becomes less about dominance and more about fit. The organisms that thrive there do so because they fit their environment precisely. They are not the strongest or the fastest. They are the most appropriate. Human fear often arises when we encounter environments where we do not fit. The deep ocean is one such place. It does not welcome us. It does not accommodate us. It reveals the limits of our biology. This revelation can feel like a threat to our sense of agency, but it can also be an invitation to rethink what survival means. It is not about conquering every environment. It is about recognizing where different strategies apply. The deep ocean shows us a version of survival stripped of narrative. There are no heroes, no villains, no triumphs in the dramatic sense. There is only persistence. Fear, when examined in this context, becomes less of an enemy and more of a guide. It points toward the boundaries of our understanding. It signals where assumptions fail. By studying the deep, we learn not just about strange creatures, but about ourselves, about the instincts we carry, about the stories we tell, about the discomfort we feel when confronted with life that does not mirror our own. The nightmare label begins to lose its grip here. What once felt threatening now feels instructive. The deep ocean becomes a mirror reflecting our fears back at us, not to frighten us, but to show us their shape. This does not make the deep less extreme. It remains dark, cold, and pressurized. But it becomes less mysterious in the sense that matters. We begin to see how fear and survival interact, how one shapes perception and the other shapes reality. Understanding this interaction prepares us for the final shift in perspective. After exploring fear, adaptation, and ancient persistence, we are left with a choice in how we interpret what we've seen. We can continue to frame the deep ocean as a place of nightmares, reinforcing distance and dread, or we can recognize it as a place of solutions, revealing what life becomes when stripped to its essentials. That recognition does not require comfort. It requires clarity. And with clarity comes a quieter conclusion, one that does not tie things up neatly, but allows the story to settle, much like the deep itself. As we reach this point, there is no dramatic boundary to cross, no sharp ending. The deep ocean does not resolve itself into a single idea or message. It simply continues, the same way it always has, quietly, persistently, without concern for how it is interpreted. When people talk about monsters, they're usually talking about threats, something that intends harm, something that violates order, something that should not exist. The creatures of the deep ocean do none of these things. They are not intruders. They are not anomalies. They are residents. They belong completely to their world, even if that world feels incompatible with ours. The word monster, when applied to them, is less a description and more a confession. It admits discomfort. It reveals fear of difference. It signals the point where human intuition stops working reliably. In that sense, the monsters are not in the deep. They are in the space between what we expect life to look like and what life actually becomes under different rules. Miracles, on the other hand, are usually framed as rare interruptions, exceptions to the normal order of things. The deep ocean suggests something quieter. Here, what looks miraculous to us is simply ordinary persistence. Life continues where we would not expect it to, not through spectacle, but through adjustment. Bodies bend instead of breaking, metabolism slow instead of racing. Light is used sparingly instead of wasted. Time stretches instead of rushing forward. None of this is dramatic. None of it is symbolic. It is practical. Seen through this lens, the deep ocean stops being a gallery of horrors and becomes something closer to a record of what life does when stripped of excess, when visibility disappears, when food becomes rare, when speed loses value. The shapes that emerge are not trying to impress or frighten. They are answers to questions we rarely have to ask on the surface. How do you survive without light? How do you eat when meals are unpredictable? How do you endure pressure that never relents? How do you exist when nothing changes quickly? The answers look strange to us because they were never meant to look familiar. There is also a quiet honesty to the deep that is easy to miss. Nothing there pretends to be anything else. There are no bright signals meant to deceive human eyes. No behaviours evolve to impress observers. Everything exists because it works, and only because it works. This honesty can feel unsettling. We are accustomed to living in environments shaped by interpretation, by aesthetics, by social meaning. The deep ocean offers none of that. It does not reflect us. It does not adapt to us. It does not acknowledge us. And yet, that indifference carries a kind of calm. When you strip away the nightmare framing, what remains is a place of remarkable consistency. Pressure is constant. Darkness is constant. Cold is constant. Within those boundaries, life finds stable ways to continue. There is little chaos. There is little waste. The quiet below is not empty. It is restrained. This restraint changes how fear feels. Fear thrives on unpredictability and urgency. In the deep ocean, urgency is rare. Events unfold slowly. Outcomes are shaped over long spans. Even danger operates on a measured scale. That does not make the deep safe. It makes it precise. Precision is harder to dramatize than violence. It does not lend itself easily to stories of monsters and terror. But it tells a more accurate story, one about survival as alignment rather than conquest. When humans descend into the deep, whether physically or through images and stories, we bring our assumptions with us. We expect hostility. We expect drama. We expect something to react to our presence. When none of that happens, the absence feels eerie. But absence is not aggression. Silence is not threat. The creatures of the deep are not waiting. They are not lurking. They are not aware of us in any meaningful way. Their lives are shaped by conditions that do not include human observers. We are a brief interruption, not a factor. This realization can be humbling. It reminds us that life does not revolve around human perception. That our categories of beauty and horror are local, not universal. That what feels wrong to us may be perfectly right elsewhere. There is a temptation, when confronted with something so unfamiliar, to impose meaning. To turn deep-sea creatures into symbols, monsters representing fear, miracles representing hope. But the deep ocean resists symbolism. It is not trying to teach us lessons. It is simply existing. Any meaning we find there is something we bring back with us. Perhaps what the deep offers most clearly is perspective. It shows us that survival does not require familiarity, that success does not require visibility, that life can persist without speed, without light, without spectacle. It also shows us the limits of our instincts. Fear is useful, but it is not infallible. When applied to environments it was never meant to interpret, it produces stories that feel vivid but incomplete. Understanding does not eliminate fear entirely. It reshapes it. Fear becomes respect. Curiosity replaces dread. Distance remains, but it is no longer filled with imagined threats. The monsters dissolve into organisms. The nightmares flatten into adaptations. What remains is a quiet acknowledgement of difference. And perhaps that is enough. Somewhere below, far beyond the reach of sunlight, bodies drift, eyes open or remain absent. Light flashes briefly, then vanishes. Time stretches on, unconcerned with clocks or conclusions. Nothing down there knows it has been observed. Nothing waits for interpretation. Life continues, slow and steady, exactly as it has for millions of years. And here, wherever you are listening from, time has moved forward in its own way. Maybe it felt slow, maybe it passed without notice. Either way, the deep remains unchanged. There is no final thought to hold on to, no moral to extract. Just the recognition that beneath the surface of the familiar world lies another version of life, one that does not ask to be understood, only acknowledged. If your thoughts feel a little quieter now, if the images have softened rather than sharpened, that fits. The deep ocean does not shout, it does not resolve, it settles, and somewhere below, in the darkness that never lifts, life continues to bend, stretch, endure, and persist, without monsters, without miracles, just quietly, endlessly, being what it is.